everybody. I'm using this microphone because it goes to the camera, but it does not amplify. So I'm going to try to use my mother's voice, which will probably make you all sad, but that is what I'll do. But if you can't hear me, please let me know. So welcome everybody to the first night of community meet and greets for our superintendent finalist candidates. Tonight we welcome Tim Piwowar, currently superintendent of the Billerica Public Schools. Is it Billerica or Billerica?
Billerica.
Okay. Forgot to practice that. So the format of tonight's program is we will invite Superintendent Piwowar to provide a minute or two of opening comments. Next, I'll invite you to raise your hand should you have a question, and not a comment, please, a question, and I'll bring you the mic. Please state your name and the role you have in our community and our schools. If you can limit your question to one and only once we have enough time for as many questions as possible. I may intersperse some questions that the committee received today, so we want to try to get those in if we can. And finally, our guest is prepared to address thoughtful questions, and we know you'll deliver them with civility and respect. And if someone pushes that boundary just a little bit, we'll encourage you to kind of dial it back. So we'll wrap up the questions by 6:15 so that Superintendent Piwowar can provide a closing statement and so that he can meet his 6:30 commitment. And then, of course, he'll be with the committee at 7:30. So the other thing I want you to know is the link to the feedback form. Just a reminder, it's on the superintendent search page on the Melrose Public Schools website. So you can Google that and find it there. So please, we'd love to have your comments. The committee is very serious about hearing what you have to say and what you think. So, all right, Superintendent, you've had quite a day.
Yeah.
Yeah? Long day?
No, it's been a great day.
Excellent. You ready to meet our community members?
Absolutely, happy to do so.
Wonderful. So we're going to get started with some opening remarks.
Sure, thank you very much, Chair Driscoll. And I'll similarly use my teacher voice. Hopefully you can all hear me well. I tend to project decently. So my name is Tim Piwowar. I am currently the superintendent of Billerica Public Schools. I have been in that role for 11 years, having spent 26 years, basically since I got out of the college in the Billerica Public Schools. Started initially coming fresh out of college as a high school math teacher. Loved teaching math, loved seeing the impact on kids' faces, making a difference in that way, but realized after getting a couple of taps on the shoulder that I could really be getting in this job as educators to help kids. And while I had a really direct influence on like the 100, 125 kids I had in my classroom every day, it was the opportunity to be able to reach many more kids in a different role that encouraged me to go into administration. I became in 2005 our district's K through 12 curriculum coordinator for math, science, and health at the time. Later became a STEM coordinator. Moved into central office in 2010, was the director of information systems and accountability. 2011, after a shakeup in our central office, became the assistant super for finance and operations. And now, again, as I said, finishing my 11th year since 2012 as superintendent in Billerica. That being said, from a personal and professional perspective, I'm looking to come to a community that has values that are really about aligned with my core value that we all have a fundamental responsibility collectively for all of our kids. We all have responsibility for all of our kids, and all means all, no ifs, no ands, no buts. And knowing everything that I know about Melrose, and as I've continued to learn throughout the course of the day today, I'm really excited about the possibility that this place could be it for me. As I said, to the screening committee, as I've said throughout the process, I'm only about halfway through my career as a superintendent. I've got, at least another decade to go, and so I'm looking for a place that where I can go and make a meaningful impact on behalf of kids, and I'm excited to be here, and really looking forward to meeting all of you and answering your questions this evening. And I may get up from here and kind of walk around the room too, so I cued our cameraman that may happen. It's a little weird kind of sitting behind the desk and having a conversation, so.
Thank you so much. All right, who wants to give it a go? I was like, Mary, come on.
Hi, Tim. My name's Mary Sparks. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. We have a couple questions, but I'll ask just one right now. Sure. There is a nationwide mental health crisis among youth and adolescents, no doubt exacerbated by the pandemic. Can you provide concrete examples of what you have done in your current position to address this growing need?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, Mary. I appreciate it. And so I'll talk about two different things in sort of two different phases of my career as superintendent. So more recently, we have done a lot of work at bringing board certified behavior analysts and registered behavior technicians into schools. That's really been a response to some of the post-COVID heightened things that we've seen. Those are positions that I didn't even know those certifications existed 5 years ago, but have really been sort of in response to some of the greater needs. But that's sort of more of a reactive approach in some ways. I want to go back a little further in my career and talk about some proactive work that we did. So somewhere around 2016, 17, we had seen again sort of that heightened challenges with students with some social emotional challenges, some behavior associated with that. And we realized that we needed to do some work proactively because of what was happening in our classrooms. We really needed to strengthen between teachers and students in the classroom setting, whether it was the gen ed setting or the special ed setting. It really didn't matter. We needed to provide that level of support because again, all means all, and we have that collective responsibility. We really have strongly believed in the coaching model. So we've had literacy coaches for forever. Early on in my superintendency, we brought in math coaches. And so we said we're going to try something new. So we added social emotional coaches at the elementary level back then. And really, I could care less what their certification was because it was more important to find people that honestly kind of knew how kids ticked and also knew how to work with adults to try to help improve their practice. So as I think about the people we hired, somebody we hired was a social worker, somebody we hired was a fantastic grade 1 classroom teacher, somebody we worked was a special education teacher, right? So we brought in a mix of roles in there. And what we saw is by really helping teachers, sort of having that external lens for teachers as they were working with kids to see what was going on in the classroom, giving them additional skills to help that mental health support for kids. That really helped create more inclusive environments for kids that were responsive to those needs. So that's, I think, a really particularly concrete example of something we've done. We've also really heavily invested in social workers as well too. We use those more than adjustment counselors, but we have multiple across it, schools with multiple social workers in many places to really provide that level of support for kids. And then just one last thing that we started with in the last couple of years, we realized the challenges that families have in accessing mental health services outside of the school day. So we had brought an interface, and I'm not sure if Melrose uses interface or not. Yeah, so as an outside agency that really acts as an opportunity to be a broker between, through referrals from us, can act as a broker to help provide access to mental health services for families outside of the school day. Now we've since changed providers just because of some cost structures. We're now with a company called Care Solace, but essentially the same idea. So you're really trying to create that, knowing that kids spend way more of their time outside of the school day than in the school day. And while we may have access to, we may be able to provide access to those services that kids need, it's not necessarily always sufficient. So trying to create that wraparound idea to provide access outside of the school day is really important too, and something we've worked on. Thank you.
Another question? Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison. I have a son at the high school, a son at the middle school, and one in elementary school as well. I'm just wondering how you view your role as a superintendent with financial oversight and how, you can both support the people in the business office doing that work and kind of how you view where your input is there.
So thank you for the question, Allison. Nice to meet you and appreciate it. So as I said, I wound up I had always been on the teaching and learning side, and I kind of took a left-hand turn in my career into the business office. So I spent a year in that role that was really helped me get a broader sense of where we were. And part of that was because the year before we had some financial challenges that I kind of wound up getting pulled into as part of our central office team to try to solve, that we were able to work through in 2010, 2011. So to your question about my role, right? Ultimately, the buck stops with me as superintendent, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. I need to know, while I don't need to have all the technical expertise of exactly how the accounts necessarily move here and there, but I need to make sure that there are systems and structures in place to make sure that the money that is spent wisely and is spent aligned with whatever the district's priorities are, right? And so there's multiple components of that. One is actually how you actually manage the budget you have and how you spend that in an appropriate way. So for example, we do monthly reports out to the school committee and through the community about where our budget is at. Those get approved by the school committee on a monthly basis. So we're constantly tracking that. But I think as important or even more important is about how you build that budget, build community trust and support for that budget, and do it in a way that's collaborative. So I'm blessed in the community where I work that I've worked with the same, and we're a town instead of a city, so the structure's a little bit different. I've worked with the same town manager the whole time in my career. He's been there 13 years. I've been superintendent for 11, and a year before in the business office. He's somebody who gets and values education, and so we have really worked hard to build a collaborative relationship with one another. My office is in town hall, so the 6 o'clock conversation when we're the two lights left on in the building, and I'm walking down the hall, and we're talking about business, and you build that personal piece there. But what's really important is that we have worked hard to develop a process where we don't fight publicly over money. We try to figure out what the town can afford, and sometimes that means there's some give and take because we want to come out of the process saying, here's a budget number that's responsive to the goals that the select board has set up, that's responsive to what the school committee is trying to do, which has not always been our case in Billerica. So, and there are times where the school committee comes out, if the school committee comes out with a bigger number and says, we need this, and the town manager comes out with a bigger number and says, we need this instead, and a smaller number for the school department, then you can wind up in a very public situation where families are being asked which is more important, teachers or police officers, right? And nobody wins when that's the conversation that happens publicly. So that's why it's really important to cultivate, why it's been really important for me to cultivate that relationship with our town manager, here with City Hall, with the mayor, and with the city council in the same kind of way, to make sure that there is a sense of understanding, and that because overall from a parent's perspective, from a community member's perspective, your tax dollars are going to the same place. While there may be some pushback and some conversation back and forth about how to spend it, you want to make sure that your money is spent wisely. And so it's my job to make sure that as that pie gets allocated from an overall city perspective, that I'm a representative voice at that table fighting for what I need, but at the same time, not at the expense of what's best for the community as a whole. And then once the money comes into the school department, to make sure that it's spent in a wise way that's responsive to what our actual goals and strategies are. So, thanks.
Hi, my name's Jana. I'm a parent of twins in the middle school. You said you felt like you could make a meaningful impact here in Melrose. I'm curious where you see you could make the biggest impact and how you would plan to do that.
Yeah, so thank you, Jana, for the question. I appreciate it. And so, I mean, there's a couple of different things, right? So I've certainly seen some of the conflict that's, is it Jana, by the way?
Jana.
Okay, I just want to make sure okay. So, I've certainly seen some of the conflict that's been here in the town over the last year, right? And I think that there is, I think that's also embedded a little bit in the question that you had just asked me as well, too, right? And that has come up as part of my conversations with staff here today. I met with the admin team, I met with teachers, I met with the central office team. I've been meeting with people throughout the day. And I think that, in terms of having a track record of building those relationships and establishing that trust, I think that's something that I think helps with that. Because if that happens, then, ultimately my job is about kids, right? And so if there is that level of trust where the conversation at a committee level, at a community level, is not about which dollars are going where, because there's that level of conflict that exists, and it's more about how do we actually develop programming, how do we identify where we're going strategically as a district, to be able to identify, there's an old saying in education, our job is to prepare kids for their future, not for our past. And so, I know the district has a strategic plan that's expiring this year. Certainly it makes sense that with a new superintendent coming on board, that would be part of the process. Were I to be the successful candidate to be part of that. It's about how do you gather community input to do that. We've had a track record of really being inclusive of how we've brought parents and students into our committees to establish those go through our visioning process, establish those plans, because ultimately that's who we serve. And so I think what would be exciting would be able to, build that community sense back up again, in a way that allows the district to move forward for what the next vision of their strategy is going forward. So, thank you. And I'll mention, Margaret, you have somebody on that side as well, too. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome. My name is Beth Hampson, and I have twin boys in 5th grade at the Hoover, and I have a daughter in 7th grade at the middle school.
Nice to meet you, Beth.
So my question is, can you talk a little bit about the increased use of technology, such as Pearson Math or Savas Math and iReady for classroom instruction? Specifically, what are your thoughts regarding utilizing instructional technology in the classroom versus having classroom teachers provide instruction? And can you answer that question within the context of individualized instruction and speak to what ideally, by your way of thinking, does individualized instruction look like?
Okay. So there's a lot there in that question. What I will say is that I'm not necessarily familiar with every program you just mentioned, but we use iReady and Billerica as well too, and so I'll speak to how we use that, right? Technology should be a tool for our ultimate goal around student learning, right? And I talk about my core values a lot. I already talked about the value about, we all have a collective responsibility for all of our kids. All means all, no ifs, no buts. But another one is around the instructional core and the importance of the instructional core, and that's about teachers and students and content, and really about the edges of that triangle and not the vertices. How do teachers relate to students? That's actually part of your question around social emotional learning. How do teachers relate to content? How do students relate to content? Technology should be a tool, when it's used well, that enhances strengthening those sides of that triangle. And so when I think about how we use iReady, for example, we use it as a diagnostic multiple times a year so that we can measure student growth. And to your question about individualized learning plans, we use the results of that diagnostic so that we can better differentiate at the classroom level, so that student A is going to benefit from this, needs help here or is already strong here. Student B has this learning profile instead. Helps teachers for how they do instructional groupings, helps teachers design their lessons, and that's really, I think, the benefit. I think the challenge becomes if we abdicate our responsibility as educators and turn that over to the computer to teach kids fully, then we are missing one of those sides of that instructional core, which is that relationship between students and teachers. And if we don't have that, and we don't have places that are, there are times when it's appropriate, right? But if it's exclusively that, then why do we have teachers in the first place? We need teachers to have that direct interaction and contact with kids. So using it as a tool to enhance instruction, and occasionally things that may help with individual, like if a student needs, additional, there's some great math programs out there, right? For if a student needs additional practice on a particular skill, you can kind of hit that in a really productive way that may help that student. But that being said, if that's not helping that student, then you got to get in there, kind of roll your sleeves up and get in and work with that child individually to help them succeed. So, thank you.
Sit tight.
Yeah.
Thank you, hi, my name's Alan. I have 2 kids in Melrose Public Schools, one in elementary and one in the middle school. You spoke a little bit to my question in your answer to Allison and then to Jana about some of the relationships you've built in Billerica. Mm-hmm. And from my own conversations with people there, I heard a lot of different people in a lot of different constituencies really communicate a level of trust and respect that got my hopes up a little bit coming to see you here tonight. But you've also been there 20 years. You've been a teacher. Yeah. The teaching force and the union officials who seem to think highly of you were your former colleagues. Are you apprehensive about coming into a new district where you haven't built those relationships? And how do you see building that again in a new district going?
So appreciate the question, Alan. And yeah, it's certainly something I've thought a lot about, right? I've spent a lot of time cultivating those relationships over years, and as you said, it was. There is a challenge when you move. I used this phrase with folks before: when you move to the dark side of administration, right? It's another old one, and you work through that. But yeah, that happens over time. But that being said, there have been a lot of new people that come in. I had no relationship with the town manager prior to moving into my role as superintendent, or at least as assistant superintendent for finance. And again, I think that is about, I think that's actually something that's appealing, is being able to kind of go through that process again, right? I really enjoy building, for lack of a better phrase, right? Well, and it may come up at some point, it may not. We opened up a brand new high school in 2019 in a really inclusive community process that was really exciting. But that's only in furtherance of educating kids, right? And so while it would be different work than where I am right now, I think that's also part of the invigoration that would be, both intellectually stimulating and emotionally stimulating for me. is to be able to go through that process again. So, but I appreciate the acknowledgement of the context, so thank you.
Hi, so my name is Ian Gouch. I'm a senior here at Melrose High School. My question is, students sometimes have difficulty building trust with teachers. What would you do to help school leaders improve communication with students and address student concerns?
So I really appreciate the question, Ian. It's great that you're here as a student. That's awesome. And I don't know if it's fair game to actually kind of ask a question back in response or not. So not to put you on the spot, right? But I don't get enough time to as much as I can talk to kids, I think is really important. So and so I kind of want to get a sense from you, like, is there, because I don't necessarily know what those structures that exist here are right now. So whether that's through, like, formally through student government or council or opportunities. So
Like, as in, like, talking to the parent group, like,
yeah,
teachers?
yeah.
There is, like, guidance counselors and whatnot that, students can use. That students can
Yeah.
use. But I haven't seen, like, students, I don't think, at least I haven't seen personally a lot of students utilizing that. There's a lot of, like, kind of like, it seems like almost like just a gap between, like, the relationship between students and teachers. And so I guess it just, there is just a whole kind of, like, sometimes, if you go to a guidance counselor, sometimes you ask, like, why are you going to guidance counselor by your friends? People don't want to go there sometimes. So it's like, I've seen some students, including myself, try to kind of build a relationship with some teachers. But it seems like it's just that kind of, like, added, like, piece of energy on top of the schoolwork that's already kind of given. It's not like just kind of something that you kind of walk in and expect to have. Like, you have to kind of, like, go out of your way to, like, build a relationship with the teacher, which, I figure is something that's just kind of like a no-brainer when you walk into school. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does, right? And so I don't know if I have a direct answer for your question, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that's something that I would, if I were to be the person who comes into this role, like, I would have to go through an entry planning process that includes sitting down,
Yeah.
asking a whole lot of people a whole bunch of questions about strengths and challenges, and it sounds like that's a challenge and an opportunity at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to know, is that a structural thing? Is that a cultural thing?
Yeah.
I think those are some really legitimate questions to answer. But I
think one
Yeah.
thing that I have kind of noticed too is that, like, sometimes, things happen in the school, and so, but, like, and there's people don't really get a reason why or what's going on, and so people kind of fill in the blanks, and there's, like, gossip and this, that, and the other, and then, like, that kind of tears the the seed of any kind of trust that was there in the first place. So it's like, I know there's, like, confidentiality and whatnot of certain things, but it's like, how would you kind of, like, help kind of communicate to students and families and just the community in general, how can we kind of feel like the staff that we are learning about and, like, getting to meet are people we can trust and not someone that's going to kind of, like, I don't know. I don't know if that also makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, I think it does, right? So, again, I don't want to offer up any solutions for here
Okay.
without necessarily knowing the context.
Okay, fair enough.
But what I can talk about is we just went through a strategic planning process in Billerica. We just had a new plan that was approved this fall. There's 4 key components of our plan. So one's around curriculum instruction, one's around racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, one's around facilities and budget. But there's a whole part about school climate.
Okay.
That's one of the 4 core principles. Part of that under school climate is about amplifying student voice.
Okay.
And so, I'll talk about some things that we've done. So when we developed that strategic plan, so we had a steering committee that kind of oversaw the whole process. So that steering committee included members from my district office staff, school administrators, teachers, parents, and I had 2 students on there with me. One upperclassman, I think it was one senior, one freshman, who are on that steering committee with me. Then when we identified those 4 areas, we had created working groups for each of those 4 areas. Each of those 4 areas also had students on as well too. Because if we're making decisions about students without student voice being a part of that process, then we're shooting in the dark a little bit. And so I think, the way to be inclusive with that process, I think, is a really important thing. I'm blessed to have had some amazing, fantastic student reps to our school committee as well too. One of them was actually elected to be the representative of the State Board of Ed a couple of years ago, which was really cool in terms of kind of growing that level of student voice as well. But part of it just comes from that core value, right? About I talked about it before, relationships between students and teachers. If students don't feel like they have a sense of belonging in their school, in their classroom, you can't get to the academic stuff.
Exactly.
And so I'm just going to tell a story, right, which is not about my time as superintendent. And sorry, you've been holding the mic for a while, so I know Chair Driscoll's looking for it back. So I started this, I was a high school math teacher. And our old schedule at the high school in Billerica on the opening day was that and I mostly taught juniors and seniors. The freshmen would come in, they'd run through the schedule once through, and then all the sophomores, juniors, and seniors would come in at like 10:30. Everybody would go to their classes for like 12 minutes, except for the lunch block. And there's not a whole lot you can do in 12 minutes. But I would try to make sure every kid who would come into my classroom, I had a deck of cards that I held in my hand. And this is back when we were all in rows and columns, because it was 1997, so before you were born. It's a long time ago. And I had kids would walk into the room, I'd hand them a card, or they'd pick a card randomly. I'd tell them, you know, you're sitting 4 clubs, okay, 4th row over, 4th seat back. 3 of spades, 3rd row over, 1st seat. And by the time they walked in the next day, I wouldn't necessarily know all the faces, but I made it a point to make sure I knew every kid's name in all of my classes. So when they walked in, I could at least tell sort of geographically, oh, you know, Tommy, Susan, whatever it is, right? But the other thing that I did is and when the kids first heard this, they hated me because I gave them a homework assignment on that first day. But the homework assignment, I said, write as much as you want. I said, at least a paragraph. If you want to write more, that's fine. And I asked them a question to answer was, how does math make me feel? Which is a question I don't think anybody's ever asked before. And what would come out from that is, I wanted to, and I don't even know why I did it originally, and so this is me reflecting after 25 years. You know, some kids would write about, like, I love math because it's I can solve problems and it's like doing a puzzle. Some kids would talk about how much they hated it and they felt devalued. Some kids might just complain about last year's teacher. I mean, that would happen too. But it allowed for me to kind of establish sort of a sense of, okay, how do these kids not just intellectually connect to the material I'm going to try to teach them, but how do they emotionally connect? And I think, you know, and again, I just share that as a little tiny example for sort of how my brain works. But as an idea for, I think, expressing my value about that importance of connectivity is really, again, part of my fundamental value for what I do. But how that happens would come through conversation, being part of the district. Thanks. It's a really long answer, but it's a really important question. So.
Anybody else for the first time? Want to spread it around?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight. You mentioned in the last response diversity and equity. I'm curious what your take is on those terms and how you think you can foster a culture like that in a school, and I'm specifically interested in that answer too about how you would move on hiring practices.
Okay, so first thing is I think the key, as we talk about that, I think the key number one word is belonging, right? And while that's not, I mean, we use the READY acronym, so racial equity, diversity, inclusion, but it's about making sure that every child feels a sense of belonging in their school and feels that they have adults who care about them in their schools. And peers who care about them in their schools, right? And that we don't want to do anything either intentionally or unintentionally that creates an atmosphere that inhibits that belonging. And so, you know, we have a lot of work to do in Billerica on that front, but I'm really happy, and again, I'll talk about just to bring the student piece in, right? So we had our first working group on that we developed as part of the strategic planning process. 4 amazing students that were part of our working group last year, one of whom I am so thrilled that even though they went off to college this year, as we developed our first district team this year, is coming back and participating remotely as a college freshman while they've got everything else on their plate to deal with, to be part of our group, which is really awesome. And I think kind of speaks to the point about how, you know, we were inclusive and valuing their voice as part of that. And so I think again, for me, it's about making sure that there's a sense of belonging for every kid and that there's equitable opportunities for every kid, that every kid has the opportunity to succeed at whatever level, at a high level for what they are trying to do. The question about hiring practice, there's actually 2 parts to that. One is about bringing people into the district, the other part is about retaining people in the district. Because it's all well and good to bring people in, but if you can't keep them, that's a real challenge. I will say hiring everywhere in the state right now is crazy. I've testified at the state legislature, I've testified at the State Board of Ed about the problems with the teacher pipeline, the problem with the educator pipeline, because it's not just teachers, it's certainly paraprofessionals and every other role you can find in the school. You don't have enough of them out there right now. let alone trying to make sure that you have a workforce that's reflective of the student body that you're representing. Because again, if every child, there's a whole lot of research that shows that a student of color, if they encounter an educator of color early on in their career, how much better the outcomes are, right? There's a whole body of research around that. But there is a challenge with the pipeline right now. And so part of that, one of the things that we did in Billerica, which we didn't necessarily publicize because this was an internal practice, but we started to track with our applications what was the demographic breakdown of the applications we were. I asked principals to do this. What was the demographic breakdown of open positions we had in the district? What was the demographic breakdown of who we brought in for interviews? So were our paper screening processes excluding candidates? And while we didn't publicize that data, and really we didn't. There wasn't sort of a large report generated from that, but just having that conscious conversation put a different lens on how we approach the hiring practice that gave us some better results in that area. The question of retention, it can be, and I'm going to acknowledge, right, my own position as a white male that I can't speak for others, but as I think about you mentioned our strategic plan. One of the elements of our strategic plan is to actually create affinity groups for staff, to help support the creation of affinity groups for staff so that can help with the retention process. And so that's something we're looking forward to doing in the future. So.
I'm going to ask one from our online or our email commenters, and that is, how familiar are you with post-grad programming for students with high support needs? If you have familiarity, can you give examples of how you have worked to create programming as well as community partnerships to transition these students to adult services?
Yeah, so I've got experience in a couple of different roles. So we do run a program at our high school, our Pathways program for students that are post-grad, 18 to 22. And so part of that is around, doing some life skills that we actually, again, we're blessed to have a new building that has, a kitchen area built in, and we actually designed our high school with some intentional adjacencies so that program is right next to our elective culinary program is right next to our cafeteria, so that we could have that level of coordination as part of that process. And so we've had that program for a number of years. I'll be honest, I didn't create it. It existed prior to my time, but certainly we've worked to support it throughout my time there. The other thing that I do is I serve as the chair of the board of directors and have since 2016 at Valley Collaborative. Essentially the equivalent of SEAM. SEAM Collaborative is who Melrose uses. We have Valley and Billerica. And as part of that, not only have I been involved in programming in the 18 to 22 realm, we also run adult services programs there as well too. And so in that regard, we've actually helped coordinate job sites. And certainly in Billerica, we have job coaches as well too. But like one of the things that I love is that one of the job sites for our adult program is delivering mail at Town Hall where my office is. And so I see these kids, or I guess young adults, come in every day, and it's great to see them, and it's really, it's always heartwarming. And it's, that's been for years now. So, those are a couple of my experiences related to that.
Great. Anyone else for the first time?
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I have two kids in the school system, one at the elementary level and one in the middle school. And I'm curious, out of all the successes that you've had in your career in Billerica, what you're most proud of and what you hope to bring to Melrose, whether it's instituting that same thing here or something that you're looking to tackle sort of right out of the gate.
Yeah, so what I would say is what I am most proud of, I would certainly not recommend tackling out of the gate. And because it was an incredibly long process, and I alluded to it earlier. So let me kind of start from the end. So in 2019, we opened up a brand new high school, $176 million project, $100 million local share of that project. And by the way, inflation costs, that would be so much more expensive right now. But we opened that up. As part of that project, which was part of the culmination of part of a 10-year master plan that we developed on the facilities perspective, we brought grade 8 into the high school. Our high school had been 9 to 12, it's now 8 to 12. We shifted our 2 middle schools from grades 6 through 8 to grades 5 through 7. We shifted our 6 elementary schools from K-5 to K-4. We closed an elementary school. We had to redistrict the whole, and it was an elementary school that was 200 kids and was built in 1957, had a $16 million repair tag. We had to redistrict the whole town because we closed an elementary school and we wanted to realign elementary attendance boundaries with middle school boundaries because we have 2 middle schools. We had to figure out how to integrate 8th grade students and staff into the high school setting. We needed to figure out how to integrate 5th grade students and staff into a middle school setting. And we had to take an entire community at the Vining School and integrate them. At least they all got to go together into a new school community. So that was a whole lot. And so I would certainly not recommend anything like that out of the gate, right? Or potentially ever, right, depending upon that. But let me talk about some lessons learned and I think why that's important, things that are transferable. So we started that process with a master plan. So when I became superintendent, I inherited a situation where we had a lot of distrust around how we managed our buildings. There was a lot of deferred maintenance. We hadn't taken care of it. We had a stock of really old buildings. We opened an elementary school in 2012, just as I became superintendent. But the only reason that project got through was when the state building authority came around and visited schools across the state. We were one of the most unsafe schools in the state. A teacher had literally fallen through the floor up to like their knee. And so we inherited some problems. And to the questions that we had before about budget and trust, we needed to regain some trust in the community about how we handled our facilities. And so we started by saying we have never had a master plan for our facilities in the school department. We contract with an architecture firm. Again, I talked about the relationship with the town manager's office. We got funding through a special appropriation at town meeting to do that out of free cash. We went through that process. We had a whole series of master plan options. And then we went on the road show and basically stayed on the road show for about 3 years. Starting with talking about the master plan, going to PTO meetings, going to select board meetings, going to, obviously at school committee, going to other parent groups, going to CPAC, going to the Council on Aging, right? I mean, we went to different places in town to talk about what we were doing, building support for submitting a statement of interest for this project, which in a generally fiscally conservative town, we got that debt exclusion passed to the ballot box 88 to 12, percentage-wise, which was, I mean, I would tell you that night I was, anything more than, at one vote over 50% I would have been happy with, but anything under 75% I would have been disappointed with all the work we had done. So to come in 88 to 12 was just an overwhelming sign of support and how that community could come together. And when you talk about building support for something, it's not enough to just show numbers and figures, you've got to tell a story. Because stories move people way more than numbers and figures did, and we told that story about why we're doing this over and over and over again. And then when we talked about how we actually, so once that happened, once that vote took place, we then needed to execute all this crazy stuff that we were doing. And so again, we engaged in a really inclusive process, and I'll just talk about what we did on redistricting, because I think that's something that when I reached out to my colleagues across the state for advice, they said, oh my God, don't touch that with a 10-foot pole. It's the death of school committees and superintendents when you do it. But we realized it was important when we went through that process to say, we need to identify what our core principles of design are. We need to identify some core principles before we ever put a map up on the page. Because once you put a map up on the screen, every parent in this room would see where their house is and either said, oh my God, my kid's gonna have to move and I'm gonna fight to make sure that doesn't happen, or my kid's not moving, I'm okay, I can tune out of the process, right? And that isn't good for anybody when that happens. So we went through the process. We had sent out a couple of community surveys. The first one asked very open-ended, what do you think are important things for us to consider as we go through the redistricting process? We got probably 300-400 responses back. We had a committee make sure we had representatives from all of our elementary schools as part of that, parents from all the schools as part of that committee. We reviewed that information. We crystallized that down to sort of 11 themes that we heard. We then sent out a second survey to the community with those 11 themes, asking identify up to 5 that you think are the most important. That then came back. We identified the top 5. There were 2 sets of pairs, so it was really 3 things. And that became our basis for design. So when we did that, and then when we put up maps and people said, hey, why did you do this? We could point back and say, this is why we did that. Our goals were keep neighborhoods together. Our goals were try to make sure that no matter what part of town you live in, you're going to have a similar educational experience. And our third goal was that we wanted to, 2 of our elementary schools split and kids went to 2 different middle schools at the end of 5th grade, or it would have been at the end of 4th grade. We wanted to stop that practice so kids would go with their peers. And so as we drew those lines, as we put those maps up, we could point to those things, and that process went really, really well. And I share that story with other people to try to provide that context. But I think the transferable things for here would be about that process of including people, building trust, and to the questions that came up before, communicate, communicate, communicate. You know, you're out hitting the pavement, out talking. I mean, I said all the time when we were selling that project, I'll talk to 2 people and a dog by the side of the street if they'll listen. And sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't listen. That's fine. I'd still have the conversations anyway. But that's ultimately how you build support for where you're trying to go. But it's about having a solid plan, communicating why that plan is important, and then staying true to it when you execute it with community input. So, thanks.
Hi, my name is Mandy Carroll. I don't know if this is on.
No, it's on, yeah. So.
So I guess congratulations, you got the job. Can you help me understand your 30, 60, 90-day plan?
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is. So I'm going to put it all sort of under one umbrella as opposed to 30, 60, 90. So as part of my entry planning process, and I did the same thing when even though I was an internal candidate in Billerica, I went through the same process there. Which is that I need to meet with every single stakeholder I can as much as possible, not as much as possible because there's limited time and I need to kind of prioritize, but to ask people the same 4 questions. And for those, it's essentially a SWOT analysis, just modified slightly. You know, what are the strengths that you see here in Melrose and in the schools, in the community and the school system? What are the challenges that are faced? And you know, some of these have certainly come out as part of my conversation with different groups today. What are the opportunities that we have? But I think one of the questions that gets under-asked and is so important, it's that threat question, but the way that I phrase it is not as a negative thing. What are the things that we need to protect and maintain? Because if that question isn't asked, and there are some things that are like deep-rooted cultural or historical values among the community or among the staff or among the students, and you wind up, you know, hitting on some third rails that are really something that are a valued, protective part of the community, then that can derail the rest of the entry. So the first phase of that is really having those conversations. So that's sitting down with teachers, that's sitting down with the admin team, that's sitting down with the central office staff, that's creating focus groups with students and parents, that's obviously meeting with school committee members, it's meeting with the mayor, meeting with other city council officials, meeting with the police chief, meeting with the fire, you know, DP, anybody and everybody. And, you know, I have a list that I put together 11 years ago, and I don't remember every name on that list, but that would be my starting point, as well as talking to people in the community about, hey, you know who the players are here whose voices need to be heard. Who would you add to this list that I don't know right now? Whether by person or by position, I think those are important. Once that happens, my job is then to crystallize all of that information and ultimately produce an entry plan report for the school committee that would talk about, here's what happened on my listening tour. Here's the themes that I heard emerge. Based upon those themes, you know, I'm hearing that this is the direction that we should be going, and that becomes the basis and the start for the development of that new strategic plan. Is what comes out of that listening tour. Because again, we have a strategic plan here in Melrose that is expiring right now, and understandably that process is on pause because there's a new, whether it's me or somebody else, there's a new superintendent coming in. But the work needs to continue, and kids are still in the buildings, and staff still needs direction. So it's important to accelerate that process as much as possible without. It's better to be thorough than to be quick, but you still need to go through that process in a rapid fashion so that sense of direction can be identified, at least as a starting point, even if there's not a fully drawn out plan with action steps and timelines and responsible parties, but at least saying directionally this is where we're going. So let's start to put some things in place to make sure that they're aligned with the direction for what everyone here in this community is looking for. And again, with the blessing of the school committee, obviously, because it's their plan and their strategy. So thanks.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mike Botello. I have a child in elementary school, and I noticed you said earlier, obviously, you had spent 11 years in Billerica, and you developed a relationship with the town manager. And I imagine, in like the rest of us, you build relationships, things move more smoothly as you have that relationship, but it took some time to do. About how long do you think it would take to develop that kind of working relationship from, starting at zero and up to a point where you were kind of a smooth machine with the leadership of Melrose? I mean, in my professional life, it takes a few years to really have that trust and knowledge of how the other people work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't put if I could put an exact figure on it, I'd be selling crystal balls or something like that. So I don't know exactly how to answer that question that way. But what I will tell you is that one of my guiding principles is assume positive intent with people, and so we start with that. We start with that jumping off point, but actions do speak louder than words, right? And so I try to be a very open book. I'm looking at, I don't want to single her out because she's in the back of the room, but Diane has seen me throughout the course of the day today. And I think I just try to kind of share as who I am, and I'm trying to do that here in this setting as well too. And so I think that's part of how you build those relationships, because if it seems like I'm guarding secrets or I'm guarding information or I'm not being transparent as I'm trying to build those relationships individually one-on-one with somebody, why would they feel a sense of openness and trust with me? So when it comes to whether it's my leadership team or city officials or whomever else, part of it is I need to kind of go on a little bit of a limb first. I need to demonstrate some faith in who I'm speaking with and who I'm trying to build that relationship with. Because what other choice do I have, right? If we want to have a productive and relationship moving forward, I need to assume that coming in. I think what that comes down to is understanding each other's intentions, their constituencies, their audiences, and whether that is in my relationships with our union in Billerica or in my relationships with municipal officials or anybody else. There's a guiding principle I live by, and one of the best pieces of advice I ever got early in my career as superintendent. It was my first year, and I was going into a really contentious kind of situation. My mentor said to me, don't think of it as a battle to be won or lost, think of it as a problem to be solved. And that's something I really try to live by. Because when trust erodes, when people kind of have their fiefdoms of control and then get hung up so much in the battle that they care more about winning than about what the result is. And if our job is ultimately, if my job as superintendent is ultimately about serving kids, then I've got to keep an eye on what the actual outcome or result is. So I'm willing to let somebody else say publicly that they got to win if it ultimately means that we kind of got what we wanted that was best for kids. And so some of that is working and understanding optics, and some of that is understanding, like I said, constituencies and messaging, and listen, I'll take it on the chin sometimes if a kid wins, and I'm fine with that. And that actually kind of helps build that trust too, is because I know I know why I'm here and what I'm doing as a result. Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Wild, and I have 3 students in the Melrose Public Schools. 2-part question, sure. And I apologize if this is asked. I came in a few minutes late. The resume is great. So why now leave Billerica after about 27 years? Is there inflection point, mission accomplished in Billerica, or things along those lines? And then, candidly, looking at the resume, and I'm sorry if I screw up the bargaining position of the school committee, sure. My take, looking at what's superintendents in public education, you probably could go multiple places, potentially could be paid more. Why Melrose?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about the second part of that earlier, but I'll come back to it in part of response to the first part. I said this in my opening remarks, is that I'm looking to be in a place that is really aligned with my own personal values, and everything I know, and be able to do great work on behalf of kids as a result. Everything I know about Melrose fits that bill. So full disclosure, because I've kind of been saying this throughout the day, I've known about Melrose for a while. I'm not from this area originally. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so I'm a transplant. I haven't been here 4 generations, so I'm a transplant by any kind of New England standards. But yeah, no, that's fine. But one of the people that was in my induction program when I became a superintendent in 2012 was Cindy Tamor. And I have worked with Cindy through the induction program. We served in the executive committee for the State Superintendents Association together. And this past August, she started as my interim special education director in Billerica. So I'm currently working with Cindy in that capacity there right now. And she has said nothing but glowing things about this district in the 11 years that I've known her. So there's some of that. On a personal level, you know, I have 2 children. I have a current senior in high school and a current freshman, 2 boys. My oldest, we spent a lot of time traveling. He's a competitive athlete, but he's going off to college next year. And so on a personal level, that frees up some time for me to kind of look at some changes. And so that's one of my own personal inflection points on that regard. So, thanks.
Hi, I'm Tamara Nedjar. I also have a son here in elementary school, and I actually came through the Melrose school system, so I've got a dual viewpoint. One of the things that I'm really hearing from you in everything that you say is that communication is very important to you. I think I have that right. Yeah. And it's easy to see how you can foster communication with certain roles, the teachers and the principals and the members of the town. You'll be working with them on a very close basis. How do you plan to foster not just a communication out from you to the community, but that loop where you then get the feedback back to you and can actually have conversations?
Yeah, so I mean, I will be honest. I mean, unfortunately, COVID disrupted some of that, right? I think everywhere, right? And that's not just a Melrose thing, or that's not just a Billerica thing. And while, you know, Zoom has provided some opportunity to get that feedback, there's nothing like actually having a conversation face to face with someone, reading their body language, kind of seeing that kind of the eye twitch happen when you say something that they may not agree with, right? Or seeing the smile when you say something they do agree with, right? Those are things that are actually impactful and important. So, you know, part of that would be, I'm not sure exactly what the culture is right now around this. But there are, whether it's having superintendent coffees where people can come in and share their viewpoints, whether there is some level of surveying that takes place to kind of get some level of objective data, whether that's doing student climate surveys, to get back to the question about students earlier, or doing parent surveys around that and perceptions of the school system. It's being out there and visible at the sporting events, at the drama festivals, at the robotics competitions, at the elementary choral concerts, at all those kinds of things, right? Because those in between moments, when you see people in the lobby or you kind of hear the reaction, those are things that are really, really impactful. And I think that I talked about my entry process, but that's sort of the entry process kind of start happening in that summertime. Once the school year gets going, it's fly, 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 fly. But those become some of the points where you can see how the work that we do creates joy for kids and families. And kids that are experiencing joy learn a lot better than kids that aren't. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, thanks.
All right, lady. It's your turn.
I've seen that hand keep going up for a while.
Finally.
So
Oh my gosh. So I'm sorry if this gets a little long-winded, but I promise I'll get to my questions.
Sure.
So you've talked so much about connection, relationships, belonging, and the power of that in education. And I'm so excited to be hearing that because we know that belonging and connection and relationships are protective factors for students, right? And that the achievement goes up when students are connected in school, and disciplinary problems go down.
Yep.
So to that end, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about discipline and how relationships, connection, belonging apply to discipline, and sort of with the lens, our disciplinary numbers here in Melrose show disparity among Black and Brown students. And I know this is like such a big question, and like you could probably do a dissertation on it, but if you could just talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks so
Yeah,
much.
so, and again, I don't want to kind of get into specifics here without, because that would be part of the process. And, you know, I certainly I've looked at some of the data, and when we talk about disparities, there's, just to kind of acknowledge, right, whether it's disparities in discipline data or disparities in educational outcomes or disparities in access to advanced coursework, I mean, these are all things that I think are important things to take a look at as part of a larger context. Speaking more specifically to the role of discipline, right? The ultimate objective of that should be to help correct and address the underlying issue that caused the behavior that resulted in the discipline being taken. But at the same time, I'm going to acknowledge one of the weaknesses and challenges that I have is that I have never been a building principal. So that's not a role that I've sat in, and so I have had to rely on others. I'm blessed right now to have an absolutely amazing and phenomenal assistant superintendent who has served in that role, who is my true thought partner in working through some of these things, because she has a different lens than I do. And certainly I've learned a lot, right, in the time that I've been in this role. And so there is this tension that happens around discipline, around looking at trying to, what does this child, student need individually to address what that underlying cause is, or what the underlying issue is that the behavior was a resultant of, versus wanting to be seen as fair and equitable and applying the same standards to everybody. That tension is real, and that tension exists. And there aren't any great answers about that. Other than that's where there needs to be some serious conversations among the leadership team. That needs to be some serious conversations at the school council level as you're developing student handbooks, or at the committee level as they're approving student handbooks. Because, and some of this goes back to what ultimately is identified through that entry plan process, through the strategic planning process around what are the goals that we're trying to achieve here. So while that didn't answer your question directly, I think that was designed to kind of help provide the context and the lens with which I would be looking to make those decisions coming in. Thanks.
You're on.
As you likely know, Melrose voted last year to retire their old mascot and adopt a new one. And my question around that is twofold, actually. One part of that is, so recently the administration approved a flyer that from a private sports group that used the old racist name. So where would you draw the line on that? And then the other part, and like I said before, I'm a parent of middle schoolers, so parents of high schoolers, you can correct me if this is wrong, but my sense is that the current administration's stance has been to just kind of lie low and not really embrace the new mascot, to let things settle. So I'm wondering how you would help the community embrace the new mascot.
Yeah, so, and I will admit that I'm wading into some treacherous waters here, given the community that I represent and what we currently have. And that is a decision that is not mine. That is a decision that rests with the school committee, and and a conversation that the town is not interested in having and participating in right now. And so I will just say that, realizing that this meeting is being recorded. So thank you again for recording. I appreciate it. And you can refer back to some of my previous comments around values alignment, I think, as it relates to that. So I would say, ultimately, regardless of what the issue is, my job as superintendent is I work for a school committee that establishes policies that need to be implemented and enforced. And there may be some. What I would say is I don't know with a full sense, obviously, what sort of the background, or if there is a perception of it not being embraced as much, what that reason is. I can't speak to a particular flyer which may have been approved purely by accident, or may have been. I don't know, and I certainly can't speak to that situation. But my job is ultimately to make sure that those policies get enforced. And from a cultural perspective, again, it's about, I've said over and over again, it's about trying to get the community to come together and have that sense of belonging. I guess a question I would want to probe, if that embracing has, and I don't assume this necessarily is I understand that as your perception. I don't necessarily know what the overall perception is, right? If that is not happening in the way that some may want, is that strategic in a way because there needs to be support to deal with the first phase of the change of removing the old name before putting a new one on, versus is there something else there, right? And I think that's part of the conversation that I would need to have and ask to figure that out. But I probably embedded in your question was sort of the elephant in the room that I just addressed a second ago too. But I just want to acknowledge that part as well. So, thanks.
So I have one from an emailer. What are some ideas for how the schools can support social and emotional health, particularly among LGBTQ students?
Yeah, really appreciate the question. And you know, some of this is, and I realize I'm talking to you, Margaret, because you asked, or Chair Driscoll, because you asked the question. But if you want to duck back behind the pillar, you certainly can.
I'm just trying to stay out of their way.
So, I mean, some of it is about good practices for all kids. And you know, to the question you raised before too about how do we build those supports, I think that's really important. I'll talk specifically about something that we had done in Billerica a number of years ago. Jeff Perotti, for those that know Jeff Perotti out of the Department of Ed, I absolutely love Jeff. I had the honor last year when I was president of the Superintendent's Association to give Jeff an award at our spring conference as a friend of education. And we had Jeff into our system maybe, I don't know, 6-7 years ago to train our admin staff, and really particularly at the elementary level to work to degenderize some of our practices. You know, the boys' line to go to the bathroom, the girls' line, or not even just go to the bathroom, but the boys' line to go to lunch, the girls' line to go to lunch. And so we started to implement some of those changes proactively because we had done that training. We had kind of opened up the eyes of some of our admin team, who then resultingly opened up the eyes to some of our staff in the building. The reason that was so impactful is that next year at one of our elementary schools, we had our first student identifying as trans coming into that building that year. And so because we had put those practices in place, had those changes been made in response to a student, to an individual student, despite all of our best intentions, there would have been that residual piece that sat there that we had to change all these things because of that kid. And if there was any sort of resentment that came that would just be heartbreaking and devastating. But because we worked to create those environments to address those practices proactively, it went so smoothly. The kid was valued and loved. The parents were really happy. And I think that just is one example of sort of speaking to that. I think it also goes back to the question about having vehicles for student voice to be amplified. And if there are particular challenges that are arising with, whether it's within the school community, the broader community, we need to know what those are so we can formulate a plan for how to attack them. So, thanks.
Very good. Anyone else?
Hi again.
Hi again.
So I'm still Mary Sparks from CPAC, but I've been in this role for almost 6 years now, and I would say that if I were going to list the top 3 things parents come to talk to me about, it would be literacy, mental health, and executive function. I now have a middle schooler, and I realize that executive function happens on 2 levels, both within the student's abilities, but also having good systems for them to follow. Can you give some examples of things you've done to improve executive function for both students and staff, really?
Yeah. So what I'll say to that is it's not, this is also, I mean, again, I know my own personal limitations. So this is not my own personal area of expertise, and I stand on the greatness of others in my district who do that work. I will say that one of the things that can seem like it helps, but can actually hinder, is when there are deficits, particularly around executive functioning, and there's, for example, paraprofessional support provided that works to actually do the thing as opposed to teach the thing. I have been a little bit, yeah. Although to be fair, I've also actually been interviewing permanent special ed directors in my current role as well too. But that's a really important piece, right? Is that we want to make sure that we are explicitly teaching skills to students and not just putting Band-Aids on deficits. I think related to that, as I think about some of our programs, and I realize this is not necessarily around executive functioning much. This is around some of the social emotional stuff. So I think about our learning adaptive behavior program for students with significant social emotional challenges and associated behavioral, social emotional needs and associated behavioral challenges. Where when we did our whole Billerica 2019 transition, that program changed locations because it was in the school that was closing. And with a fresh set of eyes in that program, we realized that there was similarly a deficit in explicit skill teaching around developing kids' social emotional regulation strategies. And so if there's anything that we do, it is that common theme around not just putting Band-Aids on deficits, but explicitly instructing kids in how to address that underlying need. So, thanks.
All right, I'm going to ask one more, and that'll probably wrap us up. And I think you spoke a little bit to this, Superintendent. So please feel free to use this question in a way that's useful to the group.
Sure.
What does personalized learning mean to you, and how do you see it being implemented in a district like Melrose?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Melrose is at the forefront of doing personalized learning, and I shared this in my screening interview last week that I'm envious of some of the work that's been done here, and I think about, for example, the work around student goal setting. That's actually part of year 3 of our current strategic plan that we're looking to implement in 2025-26. So we're a little ways off and a little bit further behind. So, but I think those core principles around UDL and social emotional learning and flexible learning environments. I think we've talked about and competencies and student-centered classroom and instruction. We have different elements of that, but not sort of in the same cohesive way that's been talked about here. And again, I think that's really encouraging. But I think if you're at the core of it, it's about making sure that we create an opportunity for every child to get the kind of instructional path and the kind of support that they need based upon their individual needs. I mean, for me, when I hear that phrase, it's the personal part that historically schools haven't done a good enough job of. And whether that's doing things like, using the iReady diagnostic data to help identify where there may be some deficit gaps, or looking at a student's IEP goals to identify what explicitly needs to be part of an instructional piece that's taught, or thinking about how our physical environments in our schools limit the ability for kids to collaborate in a meaningful way. I think those are all factors that go into really supporting that environment, where it gets back to that. I'm going to come right back to that core value around the instructional core: students, teachers, content, and the relationships among those three things. And so personalized learning is really, for me, about how teachers, with their relationships with students, help support students' relationship with content, whether that's academic content or habits of mind and SEL content. So.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll start our closing process, if
Sure.
you will. Would you
So
like
should
to?
I go back up to the?
You can stand wherever you like.
No, I'll come
Wherever
back up here,
Josh
'cause
tells you to stand,
If
that's
I'm
where
going
you
to speak
stand.
directly to camera now, I'm happy to do that for those at home. But yeah, so I don't know if there was a follow-up or if I'm just making a closing statement.
You're making a closing statement. Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. I know that this is a process to identify the next superintendent of this district that's hopefully going to lead you for a long time. It has been really exciting to be here throughout the course of the day. People keep saying, "Oh my God, it's such a long day." That's what we do as superintendents. We have long days, and because we're out there trying to do the hard work on behalf of kids every day. But a community is only as strong as the group that comes out and supports it. So to have all of you out here being part of this process, whether or not I'm the selected or preferred candidate or not, the community is a better place because of your coming out here tonight. And I just want to. I want to say that I think there's a great future in this city. and the opportunity to bring people back together to have those conversations about how we move forward on behalf of kids is part of the reason I'd be really excited to come here. So thank you all again for being here this evening. I really appreciate it. So.
Thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate your being here, and we thank all of you, as Superintendent said, for your interest in and your advocacy around public schools in Melrose, your interest in advocacy around issues around the city. I see you all over the place. We are a really engaged community and really care about each other, so thank you for being here. And we will see you at the school committee interview shortly, and that is going to be recorded and televised beginning at 7:30 in the City Council chamber of Melrose City Hall. And one final reminder, superintendent search feedback forms, if you weren't here at the beginning, please make sure you fill that out and tell us what your thoughts are, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all very much. Good night. Well, good evening, everybody. And welcome to our community meet and greet for our superintendent finalist, Interim Superintendent Garth McKinney of the Milton Public Schools. Welcome. And the format of tonight's program is thus. I'll invite Superintendent McKinney, and I would, if you don't mind, refer to you that way.
Sure.
To provide a minute or two of opening comments. And then next, I invite you to raise your hand should you have a question, not a comment, please, and I'll bring you the mic. If you would state your name and the role you have in our community and our schools, that would be very helpful. If you want to limit your question to one and only one, so we have enough time for as many questions as possible. And I can hear some laughter, all right. Sometimes I get to 2 questions, which worked out great. By the way. Oh, that's pretty sneaky. I like that. Are you in high school? Common tactic. Finally, our guest is prepared to answer thoughtful questions. You have all been so respectful and kind, and we're very grateful for that. So we'll wrap up questions at 6:15 so that Superintendent McKinney can provide a closing statement so that he can get to his 6:30 commitment. And remember, you know what I'm going to say. The link to the feedback form is on the Superintendent Search website. So please feel free to dig in and give us your thoughts and opinions, and we'd be very grateful for that. So, Superintendent, you've had a full day.
Yep.
Yep. You've seen a lot of Melrose. You've seen a lot of a cinder block room with a lot of people in it. So we're grateful that you were able to do that and meet a lot of our internal folks. And tonight you get to meet some of our community members, and they're very excited to meet you. So if you'd like to start with some opening comments, that would be great.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Garth McKinney. I've been in public education for 26 years. I'm currently serving as the interim superintendent in the Milton Public Schools. I've been there since July. Prior to that, I spent years in New Hampshire. I was in the Nashua School District, both as the assistant superintendent and the interim superintendent. It's a larger urban school district, 18 schools, 10,000 kids, 1,000 teachers, 400 paraprofessionals. Saw them transition out of remote learning into hybrid learning back to full in-person. Prior to that, I have experience as a classroom teacher, a reading specialist, a literacy coach, a middle school department head, an assistant principal, a lot of work in K-8 experience, but also helping kids transition to the high school, reading supports, literacy supports, and I've also taught graduate and undergraduate courses in higher ed. I'm here because I know of Melrose as being a really strong community invested in public education. I live on the North Shore. I've been to a lot of the community places in here in terms of fan of Turner's. I've gone to Gray's Appliance to buy my appliances, spent a lot of time at Memorial Hall for dance recitals with my daughter. But I was drawn to the opportunity because I think I really bring 5 things that would be helpful during this time to Melrose in terms of budget acumen and financial controls to make sure things are done properly. I pride myself on being a collaborative and communicative leader with high integrity and trust. I'm visible, accessible. I'm in the schools every week. I like to know what's going on. Best part of the week is being around kids. It energizes me to go back and do the tough work Monday through Thursday. I have a lot of experience with data analysis and achieving high academic excellence for all kids and closing opportunity gaps. I resolve some really complex problems in terms of U.S. Department of Justice, OCR, labor relations, negotiations, all sorts of those things. And lastly, I have a long experience in human relations and resolving personnel issues and conflict. So that's some of the reasons that bring me here to talk to you tonight. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Let's start with some questions. Beth, if I don't give you the mic, you're going to wrestle it out of my hands. Do you have a question?
Well, do you want me to start?
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I wasn't prepared just quite yet, even though it's the same question. But okay, so I've been thinking a lot about the instruction that's technology being used for instruction, right? So I didn't introduce myself. I'm Beth. I have twins in 5th grade, and I have a daughter in 7th grade. So what I'm hearing a lot from my students is that they're getting a lot of their instruction from technology. And then they're doing a lot of their assignments on technology. So my question is, thinking about personalized learning, where do you see the role of instructional technology in terms of personalized learning?
So technology can be a tool for and with learning, but it shouldn't be the only tool we use. And, some of the feedback over the course of today has been, where are we with our return to school? Are we really back, or are we still leveraging some of the technological resources that we used during COVID? And our messaging in Milton has been around, we're back. We're reestablishing practices. We build that by relationships with kids and building understanding of where kids are using data and their learning styles to achieve success. So voice and choice is an opportunity, and we shouldn't be allowing kids always to use technology. It can be a choice, but not the only choice. Our best asset are our teachers, and they should be using all the instructional toolbox and resources available to them to leverage success for kids. And we have great supports in place from different tiers of instruction, student support teams. We have great directors and curriculum leaders, and they come together on a regular basis when there are challenges with learning for kids. How do we resolve that? And I believe that a lot of educators are some of the most talented and sometimes wacky people in the industry, and if you bring them together, they can resolve those things. I think teachers are always looking to save time, so I think we need to kind of provide some kind of tight and loose expectations around how we can use technology to save some time, but it shouldn't be the primary deliverable for instruction. I think that is best in the hands of certified teachers. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christy. I have a daughter in 7th grade here at the middle school who's had sort of an interesting sort of trajectory where she's been both in district and out of district. I'm happy to say she's back. So my question, also I'm on the board of the CPAC here in Melrose. My question is, how do you plan to control the growing cost of special education, and what are the ways you'll ensure a balanced budget while still providing all these services that the students need?
Well, that's a big question. That was kind of like 2 in 1, but I think there's a lot there. I think our best intervention is Tier 1 instruction. So if we can solidify that and make it available to all kids, there's stuff in your strategic plan around inclusivity, inclusive practices, personalized learning. And then when there are challenges in Tier 1, what are the interventions that we can provide beyond that so all kids can be successful? The demographic and the challenges that have come out of COVID for learning for all kids and teachers has definitely grown. So that's why I think it's important to put systems and structures in place for PD, curriculum review, narrowing down instructional practices, and particularly, what are the things that are being done based on their learning styles so that all kids can be successful. I do believe that all kids can achieve at very high levels, and it's our job and obligation to make sure that happens. I've supervised and evaluated the director of special education in my last district. We've had success bringing kids back into district and building programs. And some of the things that we've done that are not necessarily cost neutral, but sometimes we look at class sizes, and if there are reductions or transitions, we replace gen ed positions with interventions, either positively or for special education. We've built out capacity for 5.0 coordinators. We've built out capacity for power educators. I think all those are kind of must-dos going forward. We can't control the out-of-district costs that are going up, but I certainly think we can do a better job of forecasting and knowing the kids that are in front of us, what their needs are, and meeting their needs. I meet with CPAC on a regular basis. We're doing a search now for a director of special education and assistant director for special education. We're going through tier focus monitoring review. We're also doing an independent program review. So I think the good news out of all that is we'll know where our strengths and areas of growth are going to lie, and that'll be a roadmap for the 2 new leaders coming in and moving forward. So I do think that's part of the work of being the leader, is setting people up for success. And then down the road, when we talked about the financials, I do think we have to get into a better place of forecasting where things are going to go. And it's not uncommon for some towns now to be in a place where it's just not sustainable anymore, and they're looking towards an override. So you need someone who's going to chair and be that advocate if that's the route you're going to go, or to be looking to reduce costs and find creative ways where you can either have public-private partnerships, rely on grants, or do other things creatively to support all kids. So kudos to you for the complex question, but I hope I answered some of those things in there because it's a multifaceted question.
Hi, my name's Jana. I'm a parent of twins in 7th grade, and I will apologize in advance. I have to duck out at 6 because I have a work thing down in Dorchester tonight. So
we're not taking attendance.
Okay, you're right. So you are likely aware that Melrose retired its old mascot last year and adopted a new one. The school system has not fully embraced the new Red Hawks mascot. And there are some private organizations that still retain the old racist mascot name. Recently, the admin signed off on a flyer that had that old name. So I'm wondering how you'll navigate that, both where you'll draw the line in terms of, not approving use of the old name, and help guide the community towards embracing the new mascot.
I think that's part of the job of being the superintendent, being the chief cheerleader and communicator, and going out and saying this is sort of the issue and this is what we see happening and these are the steps that we're going to take, and clearly articulating the why. So the more ways you do that, the more people will get on board. And if it went out the first time, what worked and what didn't work? I heard the same thing over the course of today, that it was rolled out. It's not really gaining traction, let's say, and there's a way to revisit that. So I pride myself on being in places where people can speak to me and being visible and approachable. I go to PTO meetings, I go to faculty meetings, I go to the lunchroom to talk to teachers, I go to city events, I talk to the Rotary Club, I go anywhere and talk about our schools to resolve those sort of things. So that would be part of my work of building to consensus. Now, does that mean the whole town is going to raise their hand and vote of one thing? No, but I think part of that journey is bringing people along and understanding the journey that's being made and why we're making the shift to a different mascot. So I've heard about that over the course of today. I think there are people that are willing to revisit that and then paving out a path and a process and communicating that out to the public. I think I've grown in terms of being a strong communicator during difficult times through COVID to explain these sort of things and why we're doing it in a clear and transparent way.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I have an elementary school student and a student at the middle school. And my question is for you in regards to something you said about having navigated some tricky situations in your past work. And Melrose has been in some tricky situations over the past couple of years, and I think we are still in a couple of tricky situations and will continue to be. So I'm wondering if you could just comment on maybe some of the loose details of what maybe some of those were that you were able to solve, and how you would sort of tackle some of the problems that Melrose is facing.
So the first bigger one was the U.S. Department of Justice cited the EL program in Nashua around 7 different things, and we came to an agreement that we would improve those 7 things over a period of time after the budget had been approved, and they put us on a timeline for compliance. So everything from teacher licensure, professional development, the evaluation tool, improving the credentials for EL certified administrators, the curriculum materials, all 7 things. So I worked with the Assistant Superintendent for Elementary, the Director of EL, to put together a compliance plan that got approved by DOJ, along with working with the union in terms of understandings moving forward and how we would do those things. A lot of them were joint management pieces, because in that district, all PD was under a master plan. The teacher evaluation was under a JLM, so working collaboratively with them in terms of the must-dos going forward, because they usually don't take no very well, so you kind of have to find a way to move forward. Another incident I resolved was a kind of a civil rights piece where an incident happened at the middle school. Not to disclose all the stuff that was in the agreement, but it meant on a regular basis meeting with social workers, standing up professional development, resolving policy, training the administrators on protocol, reviewing all this with the aggrieved party, sending information back to the Department of Justice. All of that was done in agreement and according to the timeline and resolved. So I would steer to those as 2 complex challenges. But if I think of others, I'll let you know.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mike Patello. I have a child in elementary school, and I guess the initial question I had was related to what she asked. We're trying to learn about you and your background, but you've come to Melrose and interested in it. In your homework about Melrose, what did you see as some of the biggest challenges that you might face if you were to take this position?
So the 2 that stand out, obviously the budget pieces that I've seen that have been advertised and kind of coming to resolution. Having an independent party help resolve how the accountings were done and past performance around managing the budget. And I think, that's key to the public trust, in that you can't go asking for more or things that are different if you're not managing the limited resources you have really well. So I'm a big systems person, I'm a process person, I'm firm and fair, I believe in holding people accountable, and when those issues come up, resolving them in a fair and equitable way. The other piece is just in terms of communication and rebuilding the trust and being present and being an ambassador for the schools. I firmly believe there's a lot of great things that go on in the schools that don't get communicated. So post-COVID, it's kind of a PR piece of just sharing the good news that happened here. Unfortunately, I think post-COVID, a lot of the bad news or rumor travels twice as fast, so we're always in this catch-up game. So I think it's our job to go, and my job to go out and be in places and share and, maybe dispel some of the misinformation that goes out there around the schools. Because I think from the people I spoke with today, they're doing great work. There's a lot of good things here. This facility, the instruction, personalized learning, all of that is, some of the challenges. My role coming in would be to listen, to learn, put together an entry plan, set benchmarks for communication, and if it's not broken, don't fix it. But of the things that are broken, I've heard a lot of concerns around returning to in-person learning, systems, processes, procedures, and supporting the good leaders that are here. They want someone who's going to be able to be with them during the good and the bad times, and I've done that for leaders in the past, going during COVID, of standing with them during some difficult times when there was not a lot of consensus on a lot of things, but we were trying to do the best that we could with the resources we had and the knowledge at the time. I think down the road, I've also heard challenges here in terms of space and enrollment and where's that going to end up. And we have the same challenges in Milton. We're landlocked. There's not a lot of places to put up a new school. So think of creatively within the budget and trying to find ways where you can resolve those issues, because class size does matter, the quality of the teacher matters, the quality of the leadership at the building matters. All those things are key things that, I think I can be helpful with. Yep.
Hi, I'm Alistair. I'm also a twin parent, and I'm and I also need to leave for a parents' driver's ed class, so I'm sorry. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your vision, your understanding of equity and inclusion in a school like this, in a town like this, and talk some about specifically about hiring staff and faculty and retention.
So I've done a lot of work in that space, and I particularly, left New Hampshire to come to Massachusetts to work on that. I think I've been a stabilizing force with that work in Milton. I work closely with our DEI director. We call equity and learning one of our 3 pillars or main areas in our strategic plan. We've done a lot of work since having an equity audit a couple of years ago and identifying opportunity gaps for kids and some disproportionality. We've worked diligently to hire a restorative justice coach that's gone around and really resolved many of the discipline issues that we've had at the secondary level. I'm part of the Mass Ready, the superintendent's group, working with across the state around these sort of issues. We're part of a DESE diversification grant in terms of strategizing how we can recruit, retain teachers and students of teachers of color across the district. I was at the job fair this past weekend with Mass Partnership for Diverse Education. Our metrics team has set diversity goals and metrics goals for the next 5 years, and we have benchmarks on that, and where do we want to be so that our teacher workforce represents the student population that's in front of them. We have strong partnerships with the Calculus Project, breaking down barriers for kids to achieve at high levels in mathematics at the high school. And we have a MESCA group, which is our Milton Educators and Staff of Color Association that does a lot of work in that space and supported by the DEI office in terms of affinity groups, book studies, and really meeting and letting us know about working on implicit bias and finding ways so that all kids have access and opportunity to high levels of education and opportunity. And we see that as key to our work. I see it here in Melrose in your inclusivity and responsive kind of area of your strategic plan. We in Milton identify it differently. So that's some of the work I've done this year in that area, which is, I think, really fundamental going forward.
Good afternoon. My name's Alan. I'm the father of elementary and middle school students here in Melrose, and my question is about the middle school. I was having another playground conversation this afternoon with parents who all share the observation and feeling that there are some pretty deep cultural and student behavior problems in our middle school that have worsened since COVID. My sense is that this is a national phenomenon, that Melrose is not unique in this, but we haven't found a way out of it either. So my question to you is, I guess you've been in 2 districts since the start of the pandemic. What have you seen that has helped build or restore a culture of safety and learning and inclusion, especially at the middle school level, either in the districts where you've worked or looking more broadly afield?
That's a big question, and I've worked in middle school for like 5 or 6 years. It's a wacky time for everybody involved. It's not easy. And since COVID, a lot of the socialization skills that kids are used to having missed out on chunks of time. And we have kids in the high school who are never in school. They missed that whole piece. I think our equity and restorative work is key to all of that in terms of having circles, setting expectations. What I've seen here is, just this open and safe place where kids are honored and valued. Everybody knows their name. The principal knows all their names. I think there's work to be done in that area, both in terms of instruction, SEL curriculum, SEL screeners, but also just setting expectations across the building, in the classrooms. And there is some feedback over the course of today of getting back to what are our core values? What do we really believe here in Melrose? And what are the things that we're going to really hold firm on? And I would hope one of those is, healthy safe, respectful relationships. And I think we know from research, all good relationships build on trust. And if we can establish that with a lot of either the kids or the adults, we'll do fine just bringing things going forward. In terms of things that I've seen successfully, this restorative work in both districts, putting in interventions in place for kids that are struggling, access to mental health supports when needed. Social workers have been a resource as well. And then our community partners. I mean, I can't say enough about the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the Adult Learning Center, the public library. Any of the places in Nashua, when I asked for help, they were always willing, and we found creative solutions to put things in place for kids. So I don't know if there's a perfect solution, because if there was, everybody would be using it. But at the same time, I think there's work to be done around this is who we are, this is how we treat one another, and these are the expectations. And when we don't agree, this is how we're going to resolve those things. Yep.
Is there going to be a fight here? I just want to know.
Hi, I'm Allison. I have boys at the high school, middle school, and elementary school. I don't know everybody in this room, but when I look around, it's a lot of elementary school and middle school parents. And I'm just wondering how you plan to engage high school parents, because I feel like this is just my observation that there seems to be kind of a drop-off in engagement. I think some of that is just sort of the normal evolution of coming through school and maybe less FaceTime in the school, but I think that it's still a really important time to engage families, so I'm wondering how you might go about doing that.
So again, in the past, I've gone to PTO meetings and met with parents. I go to community events. I meet with, city or district officials or city or district organizations. I'm happy to talk about the work of the school and hear feedback at any time. We meet monthly with the PTO presidents and a PTO cabinet. We meet monthly with the CPAC organization. And then in Nashua, we put together a community group that were kind of our key communicators that gave us feedback going forward in terms of how the district was communicating. And there were high school folks on that as well. And I led kind of the work there in terms of doing a communication audit and finding ways that we can communicate proactively and, in times of crisis when things happen, concisely and without, breaching confidentiality and letting the public know that our kids are safe and this was an incident that happened, but not divulging everything. So it's unfortunate that that's the path that happens in terms of being overly involved in elementary, and then it kind of fades over time. But, it's not uncommon for that to kind of come full circle when, the end of the high school years and questions come up about what's happening next. I think that's the time we join with guidance and other of our administration around how we can help and support families moving forward. So.
Anybody else for the first time? Matt?
Hi, my name is Matt. I've got 2 kids in the system in the elementary level. One of them is a kindergartner, so I'll be part of the system for a long time. But I heard the word strategic planning earlier when I just walked in. I was a little late.
Yep.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your thought process around strategic planning,
Yep.
how you develop it, how you build consensus. I see a lot of different interests around the room, different aspects of the school system.
Yep.
And how do you integrate that all into a plan?
Yep. So I'm 2 different places with strategic planning. I was in Nashua. I was a part of the process to develop it and having different focus groups and action groups and leadership teams and community input and surveys and development into the plan itself. And now in Milton, I'm kind of in this other place where it's year 1. And it's been a little challenging without a superintendent, kind of leading the charge and explaining all of those things. I think the feedback I heard today was there is an ask to look at what's been done, how well has it been done, what's working, what's not, and how we can move forward. One of the things I did in Nashua during that year and a half was do a full-based needs assessment and collect feedback across the system from all the stakeholders on how we could improve the school. And I think that would be an important part going forward. And then eventually shaping, a plan that we can move forward that would outline the needs of the district and, align our budget and priorities and school goals, classroom goals, all that around that. So we're rowing in one direction and making great things happen for kids.
This doesn't amplify, I should have said that at the beginning. I apologize for that. This goes right to the camera, so you'll have to speak loudly.
Okay, my name is David, and my question is, could you tell us what your thought is on CRT?
So I've dealt with this in my last district around critical race theory and some of the information that's out there. And I think we have an obligation in our classrooms that it represents what's happening across the world and defining that for everybody involved. I do think our curriculum should be windows and mirrors into what's happening in the real world and prepare the next generation of kids to be prepared to go out and be productive and healthy citizens. You know, I don't believe that we're necessarily teaching one thing or the other. I think our kids should know the good, the bad, and the indifferent and make decisions based on themselves. And I think there's been some scenarios where the history was portrayed in a different way, and I think it's our obligation to state the facts across the board. We learn from history, we learn from our mistakes, we learn by doing. I think that's a challenging area that, you know, we could have a conversation around, but in my last district, I think it was used in a way to prevent some of the progressive work that's being done in schools to open up the eyes and ears of students around to what's happening and has happened in history across time. And I think it is our obligation to tell everything and make it readily available to all kids across the school system.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric. I have a student at the middle school and two at the elementary level. So looking where you are in your arc of your career and what your logical next is, when you were looking at getting into a search processes this year, what one or two things when you were looking at the potential opportunities for you were appealing to Melrose? I mean, I'm sure you've done your research, done your homework. There's the Google. It's all out there for everybody to see. So I mean, in terms of, you know, what made you put your hat in the ring, go through the process, spend the time here, and like I said, one or two things, or three or four, whatever you have, that made you think that Melrose would be the right fit for you for your next step in your career.
Yep. So I'm drawn to the work because it's very similar to the work I've done in the last two districts in terms of personalized learning, inclusive practices, restorative practices, everything that's in your strategic plan. There's similarities in there in Milton, but also I tried to do that work in Nashua in terms of getting away from traditional base grading, opening up access and opportunity for kids, you know, de-leveling, all of those things, open enrollment at the high school. Those are all things that, you know, are a match for me. These are very challenging jobs. There are not a lot of people who still want to do these jobs. I think I have, you know, experience handling jobs like this. I share those 5 things coming in, and I like to go to one place, and this is an anomaly now, to do it once and do it really well for a long period of time. And the turnover rate for superintendents is very high. So I'm committed to kind of doing it well, staying in one place, and making things happen for kids over time. Because unfortunately, I've been to places where there's turnover, and when that happens, systems and historical knowledge and all those sort of things break down, and it makes it really challenging to move forward. So not only do I want to do it well, then I want to go and help and mentor other people to know how to do it. So I'm not interested in, you know, job hopping or moving around. I'd like to go to one place and do it really well, and I think there's, for me, an understanding that you're looking for someone who can repair some of the things that have happened here and be a leader to make things better going forward. And I think I could do that very efficiently. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else for the first time? Going once.
Hi, my name's Seamus, and my kids are just in kindergarten and pre-K, so we're just starting out. And one of the things I've thought about over the course of the last year is how can the superintendent and school principals really engage teachers and foster a sense of wanting to come to work every day, really investing in children and not being sort of distracted by outside things. I don't know. Some of my kids' teachers I would observe this year weren't always the happiest people, and I'm wondering what you could do to sort of bring a little bit maybe more joy, more happiness into the schools, to put it a little bit more bluntly.
Yeah. That's a big one. I don't know if I'm Captain Happiness and I can make everybody happy, but I think, there's multifaceted parts of that. I think the superintendent's job is to say to people, keep doing the good work, and I will take care of the noise and the other things that happen. I also think there's a component to the labor management piece and how those things are resolved in a healthy and productive way. I also think there's work to be done in the human resource space in terms of managing personnel issues, making sure things run efficiently and effectively. Little things like if you don't pay people on time, they're not going to be happy. If you don't, issue back payment, they're not going to be happy. Understanding the climate and the culture and working with the principals to understand what's going on there. My last district, there was a superintendent's cabinet where one rep from each school came and had a voice at the table and can share updates there. You see a lot of superintendents now even doing that with student advisory panels, which I'd like to see, and just hearing directly from kids what it's about. Part of my entry plan into Milton is I shadow kids for a day. So I had a first grade picture of myself in first grade, and I shadowed a first grader around and see what it's like from their lens and what the instruction looks like, and are they using technology on a regular basis. I think all those things play a role in recruiting and retaining people who know that they feel valued, they like coming to work, and the best referral is they'll say to other people, come work here. And if you're not in that space, because right now that's where we are, our Milton people say to other people, come work there. And they've left Brockton, Boston, Randolph to come and work for us because the working conditions are better. So I guess some of that is multifaceted, but I think that's where the key places. And I've done work with human resources and labor management and sort of that climate and culture piece, working with principals and staffing up so that we can support kids. I think those are critical pieces. Yep.
Hi, my name is Tamara Nedjar. I have a son in the elementary schools. I've hesitated to ask this question because I'm honestly struggling to phrase it without sounding dramatic, and I don't mean to. But the school, Melrose school community, we have jumped from sort of one big issue to the next for the past several years. And I really feel that as a community, we haven't really had a chance to pause and just have a little bit of low-key time. How, as a superintendent, might you look to help give the school community a chance to take a deep breath and maybe focus on healing instead of just jumping from one crisis to the next? I told you, it was sounding dramatic, and I don't mean it to, but it...
I'm all in on the low-key time as much as we can make it happen as possible. But, that's part of the work. We deal with X factors every day with schools and everything else. I do think that was part of the work we did with the return to school. We were one of the last districts in February of whenever the year that was to be fully remote and start going back. And we literally had parents picketing outside, protesting that they wanted their kids back in school. So part of that whole return is opening up lines of communication. So we had schools coming to school committee meetings and publicizing the good work they're doing, writing articles. I wrote articles, I had kids do the snow day announcements with me. We did a snow day reading challenge. Learning can be fun, and I think sometimes we get into the initiative fatigue of doing new things all the time or doing things to other people. And I think that goes into that greater communication and PR piece of showing what's going on in schools and advertising it as such and promoting all the good things that are happening. Because just being here today, I know there's good work happening, but not everybody gets to see it because it's on the inside of the building. So I think it's that fine balance between push and pull of we have to move forward and there's a crisis or there's an emergency, but also we're committed to doing day-to-day school really well. We're back full in person and we're leveraging all our resources as best we can so all kids can achieve. And sometimes just keeping it the basics is the best. When we returned, I asked all the schools focus on the ABCs, and they knew it inside and out. Keep track of attendance, keep track of their behavior, and competencies, watch their grades. And that was kind of our beginning to getting back into school and getting into a routine, which was challenging for a lot of kids. And they were in buildings they hadn't been in. They didn't have the skills of socialization or problem solving. We had like 3 sections of kindergarten. The second graders were never in school. They just walk out of the room and go get a snack, and reteaching those routines and expectations and were a key part of it. So again, I think being a good listener, I think, is one of my strengths, and hearing from the leadership team of, you know, we're tired right now, we can't do more, or we really need to move forward, and being out and having opportunities to engage the public and constituents and hear what's working and what's not. And when I hear things aren't working, I pick up the phone and I call down to the schools and say, what's going on with this? Can you check it out and get back to me?
How are you doing? I'm Mandy Carroll. I guess my question is that, you know, I see as a superintendent, you know, your role is to really kind of set the strategy, the goals, objectives, and really make sure that they're happening throughout the district. Where I see it is like a lot of the breakdown I think happens is that, you know, the principals at the school, I think, are really struggling. And I think that happens quite a bit, you know, and ultimately that does drive the experience that we have as a parent, but also our kids have in the school. So I think it is kind of similar to what Seamus was saying there, but it's like, help me understand your approach to support these principals. You know, I think kind of understand where there is a breakdown happening, like before something really explodes, like what we can do to kind of get it back on track.
So I shared today a couple of times, I'm firm, but I'm fair, you know, and just like with kids, we hold them to high expectations. We expect them to reach them, but you got to come and do some of the work. And that's the expectation. I'll help you along the way. And I think that's the same approach I have with personnel. It's not uncommon for me to have monthly meetings with folks to set expectations around evaluations, to set goals, communicate when things are going really well. And then when things aren't going well, have a conversation. You missed the mark here. We got to do things differently. You know, I have had administrators that have gone through progressive discipline. I've supported them with mentors. You know, I've done all of those things. But it would be part of the work going forward of not only visiting them, walking through the schools, being present with teachers and parents and collecting that feedback and providing it with the administrators and say, you know, how things are going. Those jobs are incredibly challenging. They were really hard in the last year coming back. I think it's a challenging role going forward. It's a multifaceted role. So I also think there was a question around HR. I hope we're investing in the future in terms of growing our own leaders and finding pathways where paras can be on teachers, teachers can become leaders and stabilize the district going forward. But I'm kind of a straight talker, so when things come to my attention, I tell people the way it is and say, you know, this is what's going on. I need you to go circle up with your team and go resolve this issue because of X, Y, or Z. So.
Hello again. As far as I know, my kid is still in elementary school. So, throughout the discussion, you made a few mentions about being, you know, the ambassador or advocating on behalf of the school to the leadership outside of the district, and I see that as your role. You're just, you know, I have a military background, and I see that you're the commanding officer, and you got the principals who are little commanding officers of the little schools and stuff like that. And I think in those terms, but that may not necessarily be the case. So I'm asking about your leadership style. I can see, to what extent do you want to empower the people below you to say, you own this, you need help, come to me, I'll be informed, but I need to talk to everybody on behalf of the district, talking to the mayor and the councils and stuff like that. To what extent do you want to empower the people below you to have ownership, hands-on, internally to internal district issues, while you fight on behalf of the district with external issues? Or fight on behalf of the district on bigger issues?
I thought there wasn't any fighting. She agreed to the low-key approach for a period of time.
But there's always, again,
Yep.
there's always that competition for resources and justifying it, and you're advocate to that. You speak there, and while you're representing the district as the superintendent, you have a certain amount of authority that you want to give the people that report to you. Says, hey, while I'm doing this, I'm going to empower you to be the leader on this aspect of, you know, the district. You know, I don't know exactly the structure of the superintendents of this district, assistant superintendent for curriculum or this or that. And I just trying to understand how you feel about empowering the people that report directly to you and those that report to them.
So I'm not a micromanager, and if I were going to go do the jobs of X number of people that report to me, then I don't need all those people there, and I'd be exhausted. So it's kind of getting to this mutual understanding of the no surprises. Don't come to me with surprises. Come to me proactively so I can be part of the conversation. Tell me about the things that are going well. Tell me about the things that aren't going well, and how can we resolve it. I like to operate from consensus, but that's not always possible. Not everyone's going to raise their hand and say, I'm all in. So it's finding ways to mediate all of those things in the collective good, because there's only so much time, so many resources all the way through. It's not uncommon for me to be the ambassador and the communicator between parties or issues of things that come from City Hall or the things that come from the union, and bringing that back to leadership teams or groups that are going to make those decisions and ask, what's the best decision going forward? That's all I'm invested in. I'm not invested in one side versus the other. I just want the best situation within the realm of what's in the best interest of kids, around collective bargaining agreements, policy, law. Like, there's a lot going on there, but I want the best solution at the time. I don't do this for ego. I don't do this for all the perks of the job. I do it to make things better for the people that are involved. And the best times are when you struggle through all that and you come up with solutions and you get to the other end and it worked. People are really happy. That's worth celebrating. That's the best part. And when it doesn't happen, let's go back and see where the breakdown was and repair it. I think that's naturally part of the continuous cycle of improvement that happens in schools and education. But it's also part of the accountability piece of saying, I'm responsible, I made a mistake, and owning it, or calling to the people that made the mistake and just saying, we're off the rails here, we're going to have to pull it back and make a correction. So it's a little bit of the, again, firm and fair piece. Not everyone's going to come to school and have their best day ever, but for the most part, we want to be prepared for success to do the great work that needs to happen for kids each and every day. We kind of have... Yeah.
Hi. We have a number of students in this district, as every district does, that are part of the LGBTQ plus population, particularly in light of the anti-gay sentiment that has been sweeping the country. What would you do to support them?
So without revealing the OCR issue, it's in that space, and I'm committed to everything in that space around equal opportunity, access, rights. It's a civil rights piece. So everything I did in that space during that agreement was in that realm. And I don't believe any kid or group or identification, whatever you want to call it, should feel anything less than welcome and have the full support of the educational system behind them. And that's I'm committed to. I don't like unfairness. I don't like things put in front of kids that prevent them from going to where they want to, or for families, or for anything else. So all of that is, I see, key to the work. I've been very lucky in my life and the things that I've achieved. I want that for all kids that come into the system, regardless of their background or experience or anything else. And I've seen it happen. When I was in Nashua, there was a girl there who, top 10 in her class, got a full scholarship to go to college by a company, and came out of our CTE program and had a trade under her belt and was making a living wage and doing all that. That should be happening everywhere. Those are the kind of things that we should advertise for a family and a school district of the great things that we make happen there. And in my community presentation, when I went around and shared out on the schools, I had a story of a single-parent family whose home burned down, and the student never missed a day of school, because of the close-knit support that they receive from the schools. So those are the sort of things that we need to communicate, that we are one community. We're here to help and support kids across the board.
I'm going to take the liberty to ask a question from an online.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Or from an email. How familiar are you with post-grad programming for students with high support needs? If you have familiarity, can you give examples of how you've worked to create programming as well as community partnerships to transition these students?
Could you say that one more time?
Of course. How familiar are you with post-grad programming for students with high support needs?
Yep.
If you have familiarity, can you provide some examples of how you've worked to create programming as well as community partnerships to transition these students?
Okay. So certainly in Nashua, I supervised the director of special education that did a lot of that work in that space. We also housed the second largest CTE center in New Hampshire. So we worked on pathways into higher ed, pathways into career and vocational, and also pathways for kids who are receiving special education services to 18 to 22, and partnering with local hospitals and organizations to make all that happen. So I have some experience. I'm not one of the people who says I'm an expert in that area, and I listen to the people that do have the experience. I do think it's our job to set kids up for success, not only with the academic and life skills they need, but the social emotional skills that are necessary, because life is challenging. Not everything's going to go their way, and how you manage adversity is key going forward.
All right, anybody else?
She's over here. Oh.
I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I have a middle school student and an elementary school student. And as I'm sure you know, Melrose participates in the METCO program. Can you talk a little bit about how you would ensure that METCO students and especially their families are included in everything that the district does, especially before and after school programming, if they're taking the bus home, how that's managed, and just sort of your general experience integrating METCO students and making them feel part of the community.
A lot of the work you're speaking to lives within our equity and learning pillar in terms of equitable opportunities for all kids, regardless of whether they're METCO students or not. I think all kids should have the same opportunities and access to all things. We have open enrollment at the high school. We de-leveled our middle school. When I was in Nashua, the Department of Justice agreement was around parent and community education and access, translating things into like the top 3 languages, and then getting to the 70 other languages that were there to make sure everybody had information and access all the way through. So I'm committed to that. I spoke to some of the things there in terms of fairness and opportunity. All of that is key to the work going forward. So like I said, if it means going to Boston, being visible and present and speaking there, or vice versa, I'm committed to doing all those things. I don't think those sort of things should be a barrier to prevent kids from fully participating in anything that happens in the school before, after, or during the school day, so they feel like they're an integrated part of the school, and you wouldn't know the difference. We don't have a METCO program in Milton, but we're certainly growing in our diversity and our makeup for kids. And we're committed to making those things happen both within the schools, and we have 2 community organizations that are committed to partnering with that work across the town. So it's been a nice kind of partnership moving forward, but I would say we have work to do that we're still uncovering from our equity audit, some of our disproportionality and the opportunity gaps that still exist.
I don't know if this one's easier than my first one or not, but I'll give it a go. Obviously, there's been a lot of shortages in staffing here in Melrose, particularly in the last few years, but probably historically. What kind of creative solutions would you have for rearranging staff needs or making up gaps, despite the fact that you wouldn't have the ability to hire necessarily as many additional people as you would need to on day one?
Well, that's a great question. Like I said, in our last district, we had about 300 openings. So we were actively looking to recruit and retain people. One of the things we did through that HR audit is streamline the onboarding process. We want to get to people early, sign them, give them their salary, and kind of have them into our workforce. A lot of things were happening in terms of the cycle of the budget that got us late to the hiring season, and then we would miss a chunk of the opportunity. So we were working to resolve that with the city so that we could go out and recruit and retain people early and get into the hiring pool sooner. We did partnerships with higher ed in terms of having clinical interns for folks who could come and gain hours and credit in the schools and be a power or do other things in terms of a pathway to licensure. Doing that in Milton now in terms of reaching out to some higher ed organizations aside from Curry College, which we have a long-standing relationship in growing teachers and educators. But I think it ties into some of the other things that were asked in terms of, what's the overall morale, climate, and culture of the school district? Is it a place where people are happy? The employees are getting good results. There's high confidence from the community. So leveraging those sort of things and going out into job fairs and recruiting and even, navigating into spaces that we haven't before in terms of social media, LinkedIn, Handshake at the higher ed, and finding places that people are going to and don't really know that they can build a career here by also going into school. So we've had folks that have become BCBAs because of their background or fit into their schedules, substitute teaching. So the long and short is be creative, find out what works, what doesn't, attract really good people, invest in them and let them grow and not micromanage them. But I think that's a key kind of area over the next couple of years, and that's why we set benchmarks in our metrics plan over the next 5 years for hiring, retaining, and diversification of our workforce. So, yep.
Hi. One of the things that you said really interested me about relying on community partners in order to really create community. To kind of piggyback on what Alan said, I agree that there are a lot of social, emotional issues and behavioral issues, especially within the middle school. And I think part of that is because kids don't have enough to do. So they're on social media, they're on their phones, they're at Starbucks after school. There's really not a lot of places for kids to go around here. And so I'm just wondering about those community partnerships did you help form those? Do you have any ideas about how we could do something like that in Melrose to give kids who don't necessarily just go to sports practice every day after school a place to be with one another outside of school and have other enriching activities to do to sort of just, help form those community bonds?
Yeah, so again, the middle school ages are a challenging time. My father used to refer to them as the dark years. They're old enough that they want to be left alone, but not old enough to be left alone. So some of the things we did over time is building up our partnerships with the public library, the Boys and Girls Club, the Adult Learning Center, and the YMCA. Sorry. It's an alarm to remind my wife to take her medicine, so I'll do it later. So some of the little things we did that were proactive in terms of helping kids recover was the YMCA does a program called the Superhero Academy. We had them come in, and it's all about SEL and life skills, and the kids design their own superhero. It's super adorable and amazing all at the same time. Those are proactive interventions that can happen in the school. We even did some programming around lunch recess and unstructured time. Playworks is another organization that helps teach kids how to be good role models and manage conflict that happens on the playground, and emboldening student leaders to be the kind of frontline troubleshooters and resolve those sort of things. In Milton, with the Milton Coalition, they have a teen center that's been reopened since COVID that has a place where kids can go and hang out and just be themselves. But I also think it's a key part to the middle school climate and culture. When I was a middle school teacher, it wasn't uncommon that one day a week we just let kids stay after school, get their homework done, get a snack, do the things they have to do before they go off to practice. But they just want that time to kind of be a kid and hang out. So I think we got to find those productive, safe spaces for them, along with targeted interventions. I don't know if the kids that are struggling want to go to school year round and be there in the summer, so let's try to mediate it during the course of the school day or before or after school. I think those are some of the things that I've done over time in terms of building partnerships and programs, and I do think it's a key part of the middle school climate and culture of having them not want to leave the school. They love it there so much, and there's things that they can do after school, whether it's clubs or academics or just a great space like this where they can be social and not be getting in trouble or surfing on social media. So I think when you are visible and present and you're out there and accessible and you ask questions around people, they're usually willing to meet you halfway and say, yeah, I'd be interested in forming some sort of partnership or looking at that. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? And that's the way to kind of get the ball rolling.
Again, I think after post-pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on social emotional learning and mental health and addressing learning loss. But I'm wondering how you might, as we kind of move forward, address student engagement and growth and fostering an environment, particularly at the high school, of excellence rather than just proficiency.
So I think that's kind of my experience and background in terms of data analysis and metrics. And I think, the nice work of that group, it's a diverse group of various constituents on a committee that have set these kind of goalposts that we want to achieve going forward, and communicating that to the entire community and hold us accountable where we're going to be in terms of college and career readiness, achievement. All of those things are laid out in that metrics plan. And I'm a goal-oriented person. I like accomplishing things. I don't like not doing them well, but that's part of the work. So I think we should be articulating across the board what our expectations are. That our kids are going to achieve at really high levels. We're going to show you the data, and when they're not achieving that level, what are we doing about it? And I think those are some of the key commitments that we can make going forward around student achievement, because that's where it's at. It's all about the kids. So I hope that answers your question, but no.
There were a number of questions that are very similar around personalized learning, experiential learning, and so forth, and how you might see that being deployed or functioning and supporting our students in Melrose. You touched on it a couple different places, but sort of comprehensively, do you have some thoughts?
So I grew into that work when I worked in New Hampshire as a department head, and I just think there's only so much time, and the needs and challenges of students have grown, that the old school methods of lecture or one-way communication instruction is just not going to meet the needs of all kids. And I think finding ways to meet them and increase engagement is a win-win. Because how many kids in middle school usually say, well, when am I going to ever use this? Well, give them a creative problem that connects to life, or give them a task or a challenge that they can engage in. And then we don't have discipline problems, we don't have behavior problems, we have kids that are engaged and invested in their work. I think they should be partnerships in the learning, and that's one of the things I liked about the work we did there in terms of being very clear in the learning criteria, the success criteria, learning progressions, and outlining models for kids, but allowing student choice of how are you going to show me that you know this standard or this expectation in this unit. I don't think a grade tells everything, but I've heard about capstones and portfolios and other ways to share that information. All that is in the world of personalized learning. So I think the more we open that up, and that also goes into the work in terms of inclusivity, equitable instruction, UDL, concerns around special education, that's all in that same space. So the better we solidify tier one, the better the entire organization is going to respond when kids are not learning at high levels. So I've done some of the work that's similar to here in terms of UDL and bringing in Mike Anderson and voice and choice and looking at data, finding opportunity gaps. That's all within the work that I've done over the last couple of years.
Someone else. This is not a shy crowd.
Hi, Tamara again. I think you've probably heard we have the 5 different elementary schools, and there is always talk about how it's the same elementary experience no matter which school that you go to, but in reality, that isn't the case right now. Would you, as superintendent, be able to work with the schools, maybe the PTOs, whoever needed, in order to bring those more in line with each other so it really is the same experience no matter which building you're in?
Yes. So when I was assistant superintendent for elementary, we had 12 elementary schools. So trying to bring 12 very different schools in line with similar experiences, bringing in similar curriculum, professional development. But in the end, you've got unique people in all the classrooms. You got unique leaders. You know, each school has its own history, culture, and traditions. But how can we come to some space where we have mutual agreements? All kids should go to school every day like it's Disneyland. It's the best thing ever. So starting there and then working towards the other agreements, I think, is essential. it can't look very different at some places, and I've navigated through that of why is this 5th grade going on this field trip and this school isn't? Why does graduation look like this and this doesn't? You know, those are the conversations we've had of kind of saying, here are the boundaries where we live. You can't have a school that has a lot of resources and a school that has none. What are the ways we can kind of make it equitable between districts supporting that school and some of the grants and other things that we have? So, you know, I think it's a good benchmark to have. It revolves around having conversations and commitments and developing norms around those schools. No school day is going to look the same everywhere, but there should be more in common than not.
It's Eric again. Just dovetailing off this, and I really wasn't going to go here, but I guess I will, because part of the equity part of the elementary schools is the fact that we have 2 newer buildings and we have 3 that are not. So when the experience that one child, when they walk into, 2 of our newer buildings versus they walk into other schools, it's some of our buildings are frankly in disrepair, no different than any other district. So I guess, have you had experience with the SBA process, advocating? I was back in an earlier, it feels like a lifetime ago, when we built the middle school, the former superintendent literally went from the basement to the roof to share with the community how desperate that building was. And that was the last building that was done, and that was, about 18 years ago. So have you had experience with SBA advocating for dollars at the state, advocating for dollars in the community, and the like? Because like, if we are going to attempt to, level the elementary experience, the facility is a reality as well.
So certainly in Nashua, we had a master facilities planning organization that oversaw all of that, and there certainly were inequities like you're talking about in terms of some facilities being up to date and some older. We faced the same issue in terms of overcrowding and lack of space for preschool and special education programs. We were able to consolidate some of those programs, but eventually got to a place where to build up our capacity to support all kids, we had support to obtain another building to house our preschool and alternative ed program and all our service providers, which freed up space in the elementaries for more classrooms and other supportive programs. Milton, like Melrose, is kind of in a similar place. We're landlocked, we're at capacity, we have kids in classrooms that were not designed to be classrooms, and we're trying to find space to remedy all of that. We've tried a couple of different ways of obtaining a building and a preschool space. Now we're really getting ready to kind of champion in terms of the SBC process and a land swap and trying to build a 7-8 school on the campus towards the high school, changing the middle school into a 5-6 school and alleviating some of the space challenges at the 4 elementaries and going K-4. So we're kind of in the same kind of predicament and managing the bubble of enrollment that comes through and trying to find creative staffing models. So we're trying to build a half team to kind of sustain the 6th grade bubble that keeps coming up through the middle school, and instead of having really large class sizes. So yes, I have some experience with that, and it seems to be kind of the challenge going forward right now in terms of not only that, but the economic landscape and so many other things kind of playing into that same space.
Matt, again, you mentioned data a little bit earlier, and I'm wondering, just from your perspective, coming in every week or every month, what is the data that you look at that you think this is going in the right direction, this is going in the wrong direction? And how do you look across subgroups within the schools? What subgroups are you really paying attention to, and how do you look beyond things like MCAS? What are you looking for in data and information that you're tracking?
So there's a lot there. We have a lot of data, and you can only focus on so much. So prioritizing that, and a lot of that ties into our strategic plan, and from that we built our metrics plan. And those are the points that we're really invested in, because those points come from the equity audit, outlines MCAS presentations, and outlines attendance, discipline issues. All of it is laid out in there. Throughout COVID, I monitored very different ones in terms of staffing, making sure kids are getting into the building, check it with principals each and every day, I did lunchroom for a couple of weeks. I deployed central office staff to keep schools open. Eventually, we had to close school for a while after that COVID surge after the holiday. But the key metrics all the way through there, I'm a literacy person. That's my background. I have a master's in reading. I'm a reading specialist. Those are the ones that are near and dear to my heart. So I know you use iReady and other systems there, but the K-8 piece is huge to me in terms of kids increasing their literacy skills. Writing has been an area of challenge across the state, so we've responded to that this year in a lot of ways in terms of building grade level rubrics and expectations and modeling writing for kids because they were really typing a lot over the last. And then we implemented a new math curriculum, which has been a response to some gaps in our math curriculum. So there's a lot to manage there, but I would hope that the key metrics would be again, articulated to the community and know what we're expecting for our kids, that they're coming to school, they're graduating, they're going off to great careers in colleges, and that we're managing all those things. We're keeping track of discipline, referrals for special education, making sure kids are getting their needs met for 504s, but also responding with just right interventions when kids are struggling, whether it's behaviorally, academically, a reading specialist, math support, or that there are solid relationships across the school that kids can go to a trusted adult and share what's going on, because that's a key intervention going forward. So all of that is part of the work. I wish I had like a magic dashboard that kept track of it all, but a lot of it is getting reports from other people and saying, keep an eye on this. I want to hear back from you in a week or two. Let's monitor it going forward.
Okay, we're at 6:15 and a half. So nicely done. And would you like to provide some closing remarks?
Sure. I would just thank you for the opportunity to be here and visit the schools and visit the community and answer your questions. And again, I just think back to those sort of 5 things that I could help with here in terms of the situation the district's in terms of addressing the budget, having some expertise in dealing with complex problems and resolving them, being a high integrity communicator, collaborator, being visible and present, being in the schools on a regular basis, strong background in human relations, and lastly, committed to high academic outcomes for all kids. So thank you for your time tonight, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Superintendent. Appreciate that. And we thank everybody who's here for your interest in and advocacy for our schools, for being such committed City of Melrose residents and people who really care about each other and care about our schools. Very appreciative. And last reminder, superintendent search, please let us know. The form is right on the page on the website. We'd love to hear from you. And we will see you at the school committee interview, which will be recorded and televised at 7:30 in the City Council chamber of Melrose City Hall. Thank you all for being here. Good evening, everybody. Welcome again to those who have been here before, and welcome to those who are here for the first time. Thank you for being here and for contributing your questions to our superintendent tonight. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Superintendent David Rayan, currently from Superintendent in School Administrative Unit number 16 in Exeter, New Hampshire. So the format of tonight's program is that I will invite Superintendent Rayan to provide a minute or two of opening comments, and then I'll invite you to raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. And remember that this mic does not amplify. It goes to Josh over there, who is doing a masterful job recording this session. And if you could just limit your question to one, and then we'll take a second round, that would be fantastic. And I may intersperse some questions that we've received over email. So I may chime in once in a while.
Okay.
And we will wrap by 6:15 at the latest, so that Superintendent Rayan can provide a closing statement and then meet his 6:30 commitment. And remember, the link to the feedback form is on the superintendent search portion of the Melrose Public Schools website. So please do access that. And Superintendent, you have had quite a full day.
Yes, I have.
Yes, you started in Melrose very early this morning.
I did.
In our community. So
Yes.
Thank you for being here. We're grateful.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And You are ready to meet our community members, I can tell.
I am.
Okay, so let's get started with some opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening. I don't know which side is bride or groom, so I apologize if I'm not giving you 100% of my attention. I'm going to go right here. So it's nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming out. Obviously, your personal time is important to you. It's important to me, so I don't want to waste it. I'll dive right in. My name's David Rayan. I am currently the superintendent in SAU 16 in Exeter, New Hampshire. We have actually 6 towns within our school administrative unit, which means we have 7 school boards for each of those 7 school districts and 1 joint board, which is 33 board members, and they are my boss. So whenever the 7 school boards come together, they represent the joint board, and that's to whom I report. I've been there for the last 5 years when we arrived at an opportunity to discuss a successor contract. I opted not to move forward with that successor contract. I'm looking for a return to a community where I can be more hands-on, where I can play more of an active role in the day-to-day school-level operations. And Melrose is one of only 2 school districts to which I've applied to become a superintendent. What attracts me to the Melrose community is it's very similar to an area where I grew up, which is Nashua, New Hampshire. I was born in Beverly. My father grew up in Malden. We used to go to the banks all the time. We spent a lot of time down here as kids. But in Nashua, it's a demographic very similar to what Melrose represents. It has a profound commitment to its school system. It's going through some growth and development pains, just as a lot of our smaller towns that are seeing an increase in student enrollment are. And it's wrestling with where's the money going to come from in order to be able to support that and help transform our education into a 21st century. Those are problems that I'm most familiar with and have expertise in, and I think that's what's attracted me most to coming to Melrose. I also have some friends who have worked here, some friends who grew up here. They can't speak more highly about the community. And based on my interaction beginning this morning, I don't know if you know a place called Jitters downtown. I got to spend a little time there this morning talking with folks who work there, just kind of spending some time listening to some conversations, walking around a little bit. And then the rest of my day, it absolutely is a community that lives up to that reputation of it's a great place that people want to live, work, and have their kids attend school in. So I am married. I have 3 children. My wife is a school librarian at Manchester High School West. She's been there since 1995. My oldest lives in New York. He's a Harvard grad. I have a junior at Northeastern, and I have a senior in high school who will be at St. Anselm's College next year. So with that, you've learned a little bit about me, but I'd really love to answer questions that will help you move forward in your decision-making process and where you want the next superintendent, who you want the next superintendent to be. So by all means, please, I'm all ears.
All right, who's going first? Everybody look down. Everybody look to their neighbor. Stop looking at your neighbor.
We will practice good wait time.
Hi, my name's Mary Sparks.
Hi, Mary.
I'm one of the co-chairs of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council.
Okay.
I too am from New Hampshire, actually the Exeter area, and my family is all still there. I have a lot of friends there.
Good.
So I've got a lot of feedback. Regardless of whether it was positive or negative, DEI has been a very common theme in that feedback. And I'm curious if you can give specific examples of how you have reached out to the neurodiverse community.
The neurodiverse community?
Yes.
Certainly. So working through our director of DEI, but also within our director of student services, and recognizing that in our schools, a lot of the problems or issues that we're running into are relative to the way that our students learn, and particularly how that's changed since COVID has come, and the growth and development models that our students lost as a result of being isolated. It kind of has amplified our attention to having to expand our universal approach through Tier 1 instruction. A lot of our teachers have not been trained in order to be able to do that. So when we look at how the brain works and where the brain develops, we've identified that a lot of our students in grades 4 and 5 who are exhibiting some of the behaviors that we hadn't seen before are instinctively moving through a referral process in special education, which isn't necessarily what we want. What we want is for students to be approached in the way that they learn a little bit more systematically and diagnostically. So the work that we've done with Andreas Mejia as our DIJ director, as well as Dr. Renee Bennett, who is our Director of Student Services, is kind of scaling back and utilizing the services of Dr. Robert Macy from the International Trauma Center, and his headquarters is right here in Boston, and understanding how trauma and this isolation that students have gone through for the last few years has contributed towards some of the shifts in the way students learn. And so understanding and learning more about that, we've certainly involved our parent community at the elementary level into conversations as part of our training with our staff members. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we've achieved all of the goals that we've set out for, because we're still at the beginning of that work. We're only a year into that work with Dr. Macy. But we certainly have a long way to go. I try to highlight some of the from the 30,000-foot view of where we are with that. And we can certainly have an offline conversation to talk in a bit more detail, because I'd love to hear the feedback from your friends and family relative to that.
Okay.
Oh, I'd love to meet your mom.
Hi, my name's Jana. I have twins in 7th grade. Being from New Hampshire, I'm curious what aspects of competency-based education you would see bringing here to a community like Melrose, and how you could fold that into our efforts at personalized learning.
Certainly, it's a great question. In 2005, the State Board of Education in New Hampshire instituted, as part of its minimum academic standards, the requirement for all school districts to have a plan to award credit through a competency-based system. In 2015, the regulations shifted again that required all school districts to award credit through a competency-based system. So it gave us 10 years to develop a system in order for us to be able to do that work. And so that meant a lot of school districts immediately went to, how are we grading students, as opposed to, no, how are we shifting our instruction as a result of a competence continuum for grades pre-K through 12, understanding that there are different levels of complexity within the same competency strands. So for 10 years, I was able, as an assistant principal and a principal, to work in leading that model in 2 schools, one being Manchester High School Central and the other being Nashua North. And having done that work and then moving on into an assistant superintendent role in Manchester, when Common Core was adopted, someone didn't tell Manchester that Common Core was adopted. So 2 months into the position, I had the pleasure of unveiling Common Core state standards to the Board of School Committee, who resoundingly rejected the Common Core and required that I develop our own standards, which was, after I picked my chin up off the floor, a 2-year process where we developed the Manchester academic standards. 88% of which, by the way, are driven from the Common Core state standards, because that's what good practice is, and it's what good teaching is. We used an international model in order to be able to do that. So then, having developed those those standards, and then shifting them into competency statements, I-CAN statements through K-8 and 9 through 12 being competency strands, we've moved into how are we having our students be able to demonstrate through evidence of learning in their own way how they've been able to adapt or adopt the skills and practice those conditions that have been set in those courses. So you'll hear a lot about voice and choice, right? So personalized instruction is really based upon not necessarily what the student wants to learn, but how the student is going to learn it, and how that student is then going to be able to exhibit how they have learned it. And within there are those things that you want the student to be able to take away from whatever that is that they've done, whether it's a project, a unit, or an entire course. So over the last couple of years, in my current role, we've been working on student-developed assessments or student-driven assessments. So not only do we have students explaining to us here's what I'm getting out of this, and here's what I think I can do to show you what it is that I know and how well I know it. And so we coach them to be able to develop their own assessments. That led us to gateway defenses in grades 5, 8, and 12. So now you have a 5th grade student who's going to give you a pretty much a demonstration of their cumulative learning K to 5, which is extraordinary and a ton of fun when you have a student captivate an audience. And I have a celebration of learning tomorrow at 9:30, excuse me, in Newfields for grade 2, where they're going to walk us through individually and as a group exactly what it is that they've been learning and demonstrating their evidence of learning within the competency standards. So I've done a lot of research on competency-based work here. In my conversations today, I've learned a lot about it's more focused on the personalized instruction with universal design for learning. So our the UDL work that's being done, the idea of voice and choice, super important as part of a competency-based system. Not all, but part of a competency-based system. And so we can unpack a number of other areas that would demonstrate a student's level of competence, whether that be student-led conferences, portfolio design and exhibition. I mean, a number of different ways from an assessment perspective. And from an instruction perspective, I think this issue of differentiated instruction, which we've all heard for decades, is really coming back into the fold and bringing into the conversation with teachers how students want to be taught, right? So no longer is it, no, it's my teaching. I taught you, and if you didn't learn it, then you didn't learn it. No, it's learner-centered. So you're learning it, and if you didn't, I need to understand as a teacher why you didn't and how I can help you get there, so it becomes a partnership. So those are the overarching I would say topics or issues that we've been wrestling with over the last couple of years, coming from a state that has had competency-based education in its regulations for 18 years. Sure.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Amanda Cormier. I'm a co-chair of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council with Mary.
Nice to see you.
So nationwide, it's been an issue with staffing for teachers, paraprofessionals, specialists, and Melrose hasn't been immune to that problem. I'm wondering, in your current position, what are some ways, maybe even some out-of-the-box ways, that you've addressed this issue? Special education especially has been hit hard by this problem of finding trained people that are actually certified and have all the right qualifications for these roles. So how have you addressed this problem? Or how would you address it as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it is more of a universal issue that's taking hold in a lot of our school districts. I'm very blessed in our school community where I am now is we don't have a teacher supply shortage. We've not, in my 5 years, had a teaching position that's been left vacant for any reason. I think a lot of that has to do with the work culture, the professional learning culture, and let's face it, the salary. Okay, so what we're able to afford in the Seacoast community in New Hampshire is very different than what cities like Melrose are able to afford, excuse me, for their professional educators. So we recognize that. But when we just did this, we completed an inventory with all of our paraprofessionals across all 7 school districts, is what is the secret to retention? Because we do have a shortage of paraprofessionals. Underpaid work, overworked for what they have to do in the course of a school day. I mean, something as simple as we pay paraprofessionals $25 an hour to supervise reading club after school, but we pay them $18.50 an hour during the school day to care for our most delicate students. That doesn't sound right to me. So we've asked our parents, what is it about retention that we can improve on to help you not just continue to work here, but recruit from your colleagues and bring them into the SAU 16 community. Number one is they want to be part of the retirement system, which they're currently not. Number two, they want to be recognized as a professional occupation that serve a greater purpose in the school as opposed to someone who just comes in, does their one-on-one job and gets pulled periodically to sub for a class. And 3 was we want to be compensated in a way that we feel is equivalent to the importance you place on our job with delicate children during the school day. So these are more conditions issues. These aren't necessarily economic issues. But we can't just reach out and say we're going to do that and then have all these paras come and apply. So what we've done instead is we have close to $600,000 in unspent funds for the para positions that we haven't been able to hire for. So we've looked more at what are some of the specific needs of our current student population as it deals with behavior. So we have a growing number of students who are exhibiting behavior because, again, in their reversion to younger behavior and not maturing in an appropriate way, we can reach out now and hire additional special education case managers who are specifically focused on behavior, using those funds to bring them in and provide the support that they would normally get in their IEP with a value add of other services that they can provide. So instead of trying to find a para to just fill this position, we can hire a trained, certified special educator who can come in and apply that assistance as well as other services that we would struggle to fill. In terms of our OT, PT, deaf and hard of hearing, we actually have centralized those positions because they were hired individually in each of the school districts. But one school district, like Stratham, can afford a heck of a lot more than a smaller school district like Newfields. But they were working part-time in both. So you were getting paid different in one district, going to do the same job in the same day in another district and getting paid less. By centralizing and offering a competitive wage through a separate annual agreement and paying all of the specialists the same, didn't matter which community they were going to, it was creating an equitable playing field for them to be able to provide the same high-level services, whether they were in Newfields or Stratham. So there are a couple of creative ways that we can do that and a couple of levers that we can pull in our budget in order for that to happen. I'll leave you with this. I won't leave you, but I'll leave you with this. We recognize that out-of-district placements for students who need services that we can't provide is on the rise. And so by addressing some of that within our schools and with the capacity in our district, we created 2 programs, one at the middle and one at the high. One's ARC and one is SOAR. And those are specialized school within schools for students who they're not excluded. It's very much an inclusionary program, but it provides special space and special time for students who need additional services such as adaptive PE, adaptive family and consumer science, some of the core content areas, as well as a Zen den or some dysregulation rooms for restoration of behavior practice. But we've staffed those with BCBAs and other trauma specialists, 2 certified social workers, all of which have been grant funded. We also had a piece of property on the campus of our high school. And when the high school was built 20 years ago, the previous superintendent and school committee wanted to purchase that house because they wanted to control who their neighbors were at the entrance of the high school campus. So they owned the home and they rented it out for a while to a tenant. And when I came on board, the school committee and I agreed we don't want to be in the landlord business anymore, but we want to repurpose that building. So we have, first of all, a new law that was passed last year where it's up through the 22nd year of a student's life that we would educate that child through a special education process. So typically those students who are in a program from 18 to 21 would now be with us 18 to 22. So that created an additional year's worth of funding that we would be paying out to services in New Hampshire for transition services, kids who are graduating from school but still need to learn the executive functioning skills. We took the house and using IDEA money and working with the Department of Education, and that took a while. I know it takes time and a half with DESE, but try working with the New Hampshire Education Department on using all IDEA funds, which are grant funds for special education, which I'm sure you're aware of, to renovate that house completely and outfit it in a way that all of our students who are in transitional needs would be educated as part of their school day in that home. So it's a learning, living lab where students will come and they'll have their adaptive facts there. They'll learn how to do their laundry, create a budget, go shopping, make their bed, care for their room, clean their home, work outside, mixed in with English, math, science, social studies, skill building. It afforded us the opportunity to be able to save a lot of time for kids that would normally be out of our district. Instead, they're in their home community. They're getting the exact same, if not better, care and services. The programming is academic and skill-based in nature, and they're with their friends. So those are some examples. Sure. Hydroponics are on.
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Jane Roper. I have 2 sophomores at Melrose High, twins.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. And I'm also a member of the Friends of Melrose Metco. I wanted to ask about DEI specifically. The demographics are changing in Melrose, and it's becoming more diverse, which is great, but there are certain disparities. Recent data has shown a disparity in discipline between white kids and black and brown kids, as is the case in many, many places. This is not unique to Melrose by any means. But I'm curious to know about your experience in dealing with that kind of thing, and just generally your thoughts on DEI when it comes to race. And we don't have a director of DEI in town, but what some leadership that you could bring?
Sure, great question. I'll try to answer in the order that you asked. So my understanding is that we have less than 1% of our students who are suspended from school at the high school are white, yet 6.6% of our African American students are suspended, which is a higher proportion, which is fairly, unfortunately, common in several school districts, not just in the Commonwealth, but certainly throughout the country. Some of the approaches that we've taken has first been to identify and call it out, and to name it and accept the fact that that is taking place, and understanding that it's the system that we have in place that was built not necessarily to manage through issues of race or even poverty, but really just to be more of a universal approach to how we discipline students. Over time, the way we discipline students, and again, I'm going to go with a blanket statement, the way we discipline students has been changing more away from a punitive measure into a restorative manner. We practice a restorative justice discipline model in our K-5 schools. Our 6 through 8 with their SEL curriculum of Open Circle, they do a lot of work around helping students through transformational mediation understand what it is that they are, their behavior that is not appropriate and how they can address their behavior. And then at the high school, still stuck in that traditional model, but recognizing that the work we're doing under our commitment to DEI it's disproportionate. And we've stopped some of the traditional arcane practices that we've had in the past. So from a DEI lens, we don't just recognize that diversity is racially based, but it certainly lends to members in our LGBTQ plus community, as well as those that are faith-based, and that there are different approaches to addressing situations that occur from a student conduct perspective based on what the differences are that exist in the situation. And what I mean by that is, why is it always that when there's an issue between a white student and a black student, or a white student and a trans student, or a white student and a female student, why are there differences that are applied to how that discipline is meted out, where it always seems to me that traditionally our white students don't have the same level of discipline as students with whom they've gone up against. And there are a number of different answers. And so what our work has uncovered is that there are definitely some discriminatory practices that are taking place within the system that we have built. And the biases that fall or that people carry with them when they're working through these discipline issues. And how do we know that? It's really very simple, particularly at the high school level. When you see the write-ups that our folks are entering to describe the incident that took place. The language and the number of words and the choice of words that people are using are very, very different for one identity than they are for several others. And so that's evidence that we've been able to then bring back with our administration and have them almost go through and dissect and say, I don't know why I wrote 19 sentences about this student here, but I only wrote 2 sentences here and was very vague in the description. So that's where the anti-bias training has come in, and where we've conducted at the administrative level all of the anti-bias training that we've done through our DEI director and the facilitators. Last Tuesday, we were supposed to have done our anti-bias training for all 600 educators, and then the snow came. And so we had to move to an online professional development day, but we weren't going to conduct anti-bias training via Zoom because it just didn't have the same effect. So that's being rescheduled. So is there attention to what is happening right now through our code of conduct and our behavior in the schools where I'm working? Absolutely. And the work and the conversations are taking place. As you can imagine, it makes a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. And that it is a natural feeling to feel uncomfortable when you're talking about issues of race or issues that is not either part of your identity or you're just unknown to talking through issues around those identities. And so creating those safe spaces where we can have people come in and talk about those things, identify the issue, because we can't unknow it, right? You're here and you're expressing this question, which means you know there's an issue that's going on. We can't deny the issue and we can't unknow the issue. So we're having those uncomfortable, critical conversations, creating spaces where people can come and share their ideas and their thoughts about it, eliminating the shame and blame game, and being able to move forward with some strong resolutions that, quite frankly, can be hard for some people to want to move forward with. And what that does is it can create a little bit of controversy. And that's what change does. Change can create some controversy that people want to hold on to. But again, you can't unknow it, and you have to be able to move forward with it.
My name's Alan Leo. I'm a parent of 2 students in the Melrose Public Schools, 1 elementary, 1 middle school.
Hi, Alan.
I wanted to follow up on a little bit of what you alluded to at the end of your answer with controversy. Mary alluded to it before. I think anybody in the community who has Googled you or your district has seen that the community of Exeter and SAU 16 has gone through a fair amount of fractious tumult since COVID-19. And I've heard from a few parents here who say, this guy sounds great, but we just don't want that drama to follow in here.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question for you is that a fair characterization? And if so, what have you learned from that experience that will help you be a change maker in Melrose, perhaps in a more positive way for more of the community?
So, Alan, was it you who posted on the Facebook page in Exeter?
Yes, it was.
It was. So you received ample feedback then from all of our parents.
I did not know the fire hose that I was going to be drinking from.
And did you receive similar feedback when you posted those Facebook inquiries in Billerica and Milton?
Every community everywhere, I think, and including Melrose, right,
Yes.
has gone through a rough few years.
Yes.
There are people, anybody, I think, sitting on that side of the room on the school committee can tell you that people will show up and yell at the superintendent
Yep.
at a school committee meeting, and it happens everywhere. But my impression from talking to people is that it got particularly difficult in Exeter, and that may just be a New Hampshire politics thing, right? I don't want to be a Massachusetts chauvinist, but we might do it a little better here. But that's a long way of saying, yes, that exists everywhere, but still it seemed to get to a degree of community upset that I didn't see everywhere. And so I wanted to ask you a bit about that.
Oh, I'm glad you did. I was really hoping you'd be able to come tonight so that we could have this conversation in public. A level of controversy is never anything that anybody wants. However, given what we've been through together for the last 5 years, well, we'll say 4 because it really wasn't until March of 2020 that everybody kind of stopped short and said, wait a minute, I can't do what? And it just got worse from there. Superintendents, and I'll speak for myself, had to make the best of all of the worst decisions that were available to us. So no decision that was made for the last few years of COVID from, say, March 13, 2020, which is a day in infamy for a lot of people who work in schools and parents, up until probably when we were finally able to take off masks, where we didn't have to require it when we were moving forward. That was a very tumultuous time. So that was an excellent word to describe what was going on. I think the complexity of the governance structure in SAU 16, where there are 6 towns, all of whom think very differently in terms of the direction they wish to go, either from a political ideology or an academic ideology, has to be met with a certain level of compromise. The downside to that is all 6 of those towns send their students to one middle school, which isn't catering to the 6 specific towns, and then a single high school. So, for instance, in Brentwood and East Kingston, they typically lean a bit more to a conservative approach, both financially as well as academically and on social issues. When you're in Exeter, Newfields, even most of Kensington, they tend to lean a little bit on the more liberal side. Not extreme, but more moderate to liberal. And then Stratham tends to run a little bit of both sides. So trying to thread the needle with 6 different towns who had different ideas on what they wanted to do individually, yet work for a joint school board of 33 people who say, no, we have always done things together as an SAU. So when we cancel school, over in Brentwood, the roads are horrible because there are a lot of tree-lined streets in the woods and back streets. So, but in Stratham, which is more closer to the coast, roads are fine. Yet we cancel school for the day for all of those communities. So do we hear from the folks in Stratham about why we're canceling school? You bet we do. They want to know, why are you canceling school? I don't even have to shovel my driveway. It's because our approach has been, we are one unified system, and so we work that way in a unified system. As we went through COVID and as we tried to unpack all of the different mitigation strategies that we had already started the DEI work, and that had started in Exeter well before I arrived. So we were continuing that conversation, and we were moving forward with what a plan had already been laid of establishing a DEI director. I think when we add in a lot of the politics and the political dialogue that went with COVID, as well as the issues that arose through conversations with DEI, the anti-CRT movement, there began a lot of different I think, groups that had specific ideas about what they wanted and what they didn't. So in Brentwood, for instance, the school board decided to fracture off from SAU 16 and open school, even though we couldn't open school because 60% of our secondary teachers required ADA accommodations, including remote instruction. We couldn't staff our middle or our high school. And so again, following SAU 16's charge of all or none, that's the decision that we made. And we were eviscerated for that. And we took it because that's my job. Brentwood, the board did not accept our recommendation, and they did open their school, and they created their own model. And as the superintendent who provides services to that school district, we had to, in earnest, provide the services that were required to make sure that kids and staff were safe and open that school. So we did. And we then started to hear from some other communities that wanted to know why their schools couldn't open, but because their board had selected to follow the recommendation of the superintendent, we're maintaining, no, the superintendent said we shouldn't be opening, so we're not opening, until ultimately we went through our reopening process. I think everything continued to spiral up. I think there were some individuals who were no longer board members who had some political aspirations that went on to national television rather than following our policy for communication and conflict resolution, despite school board chairs advising them to do so. I think there were some oversight issues that we neglected because we were so consumed with trying to move through some of the issues around COVID. So we were focused on learning loss. We were focused on creating healthy spaces for everybody to come back to, 550 pupil elementary schools, 1,500 pupil high school, those kinds of things. And something spiraled out of control because when you get caught up in some of the furor of that, it can appear to be quite tumultuous. So coming out of all of that, this year, we have not had any of the issues that we saw that were so closely related to. Your second question was, did I learn or did I grow from that? Absolutely. I learned a lot about and grew in areas, as did the board and our staff, on communication. And what does it mean to really communicate and be open and honest with people? So working through COVID, there was a lot that we could and could not share, predominantly because we didn't know a lot of what was going to happen. So we shared everything that we could share. An issue of oversight relative to our high school prom back in 2021. Having the authority having the authority expressed to people who were responsible for the prom to not do a certain thing and then for them to go ahead and do it, I can assure you led to some conversations after and some issues that arose after. But the oversight during that, given that it was a special time period, being COVID and all, should have warranted more oversight of that. So did we learn from that? You bet I did. So now coming out, it was our expectation that our budgets this March, some of which were upwards towards a 9% increase, were really going to run into some trouble. But the undercurrent from January and February was that the communities were all supporting, even the two communities that typically are a lot more conservative. One of those communities had an 8.99% budget increase, and it passed 2-1. All 7 budgets passed. All articles passed. So that was a bit of a barometer for us in terms of support. And then, thank you for placing that Facebook post, because several members in the community saw, took screenshots of it, and sent it to me and said, just so you know, this appears to be overwhelmingly positive. It seems as though, you know, this gentleman is really interested in learning more about you, and rightly so, was my reply. And so that told me a little bit about the direction that we were moving back into in terms of gaining back trust. How that parlays into the superintendency here is I've lived through a lot of controversy. I've pulled myself off social media on which I had been threatened more than one occasion during COVID. And a gentleman actually showed up to the office with a pipe because he had said on Facebook that he was going to Nancy Kerrigan me and then showed up. So I've made decisions that are extremely difficult, and I've taken a lot of bullets for our staff. I've taken bullets for our administrative team. I've taken bullets for our school board and our school committee, and that's my job. So as far as bringing drama and controversy to Melrose, that's not something that I certainly intend to do. I absolutely don't want any controversy here. But I'd be a liar if I said there wasn't going to be some controversy. You're living in some now. So it becomes the opportunity for a leader to then make the decisions that people don't want to make and stand up to that controversy and take it, because that's part of the job. Not every decision is going to be accepted by everyone. I'm an umpire as well in baseball, so we already know which way that's going, 50-50. I just know that this is an incredibly difficult position, And I don't take that lightly when I move on to another community where I really want to be a part of it. And so that would be the easiest way that I can explain my answers to your questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name's Nicole, and I have 2 students in the system, one in elementary school and one in the middle school. And my question for you is, I'm sitting here listening to the way that you've talked about your current work with the different districts that you oversee, and then thinking about what Melrose needs. And it's overwhelming to me to even think about how you might shift your focus from sort of managing 6 football teams to like 1 football team. So I'm just curious if you could sort of describe in a way that we could understand and relate to how you might need to shift your focus and just the sort of different way of working that will be for you, and how you feel like you could bring something to Melrose that those different, I'm not saying it very well, but it's going to be a completely different kind of job for you,
Sure.
right? And so like, how are you going to move forward and be successful in the way that you have been with a diverse number of places in front of you with all these different conflicting ideas, and solidify all of that and channel it into the one place of Melrose, I guess?
It's a great question. It's not the first time today that I've had that, so thanks for asking it. So you're really asking about the question of scalability, right? We have 1 football team, 1 high school, just like Melrose. We have 1 middle school, just like Melrose, and we have 6 elementary schools. We technically have 7 because in Exeter we have a K-2 school and a 3-5 school. 6 elementary schools, just like Melrose. We also have a School of Technology, Seacoast School of Technology, which is our career and technical education center, where students can opt to spend part of their day learning any one of the 12 vocation programs, whether you're aware of with, I think it's Essex nearby that has automotive, carpentry, things along those lines. We have an adult education program that we have a lot of pride in. That's part of the cooperative school district. So in terms of scalability, we have 4,850 students. That's not very many more than the number of students who are enrolled here in Melrose. Now, square mileage, I may not have a vehicle allowance in Melrose because I won't need to get in my car. And so that's a nice luxury to have, where you're within a 4 square mile area, working with, I think, fewer educators, but not because of the size, okay? The complexity of the governance structure is really the hardest part of the superintendent's job in SAU 16. So being able to work with your administrative staff at the senior leadership team and work with the individual school boards and the individual communities, I think is really a training ground for the conflict resolution that may come up in a single district like Melrose. So the complexity of problems that come our way either have already been managed or resolved, in any one of those 7 school districts, or if it's a new problem in Melrose, it's most likely something that I encountered in my work when I was in Manchester or in Nashua. So, which operate also on a municipality schedule, not a SB2 or annual district schedule. So I'm not so much concerned about scalability. I'm actually salivating at the idea of working with 1 school committee with 7 school committee members. That's crazy. And a leadership team in our schools, and one community completely devoted to its school system and trying to understand more about what you want it to be. Sure.
Hi, my name's Alex, and
Hi, Alex.
my kids have graduated, but I have a question about Medco.
Sure.
So we've had the program for a long time.
Yeah.
And generally, kids are happy. They feel like they got a pretty decent education, but there's never been a feeling from our Medco kids that they ever truly belonged.
Okay.
And so that's something that I'd love to see happen. Any ideas on how we can make that happen?
It hurts my heart to hear that, because any student that walks into a school should be made to feel like it's there for them and just for them. So we've adopted the "You Belong Here" mantra in our school system in all of our schools, so that we can help students recognize that that's what we aspire to. It's not where we are, but it's what we aspire to. Our work has led us to developing affinity groups within our middle and our high schools, where students of similar identities can come and share their stories, can share their joys, can share their hearts with each other and talk through some of the happy, joyous times and some of the hard times that they're going through. I've shared this earlier today. A sense of belonging doesn't mean that you fit in, right? Doesn't mean that you assimilate. It means that you're accepted and you're a part of the fabric because of who you are. And, you know, we have a percentage. We use percentages when we talk about demographics and student enrollment. It's not 100% if not everybody's counted. So if it's 1, 2, 4, 6% of our students who identify as non-white, that's 94%, and we're not full, we're not whole. So helping, I think, shift some mindsets of helping students believe they belong. One, again, looking at it through a systems lens of, I'd like to understand why. I'd like to learn more about why. I'd like to have students unpack their stories of when they were here. A colleague of mine, Henry Turner, who's the principal over at Newton North, shared that when he came through Melrose High as a student. A man of color who lives in the community, and even then believing that he didn't belong. And that we're still wrestling with that today is something that concerns me. And so being able to get in and unpack and hear those stories, and then learn a little bit more about ourselves and recognize what it is that we're doing and not doing that can help students feel belong. I think that's an important function. I think that's an important role. I don't have the silver bullet. I do know that there are a lot of smart people that can help us solve this, but it has to be obviously a priority that we need to attack. Thank you for asking that question.
That weight thing really works.
Good evening. My name is Eric. I have a student at the middle school and 2 students at the elementary level. Thank you for being here tonight. And Alan, thank you for the question. And candidly, thank you for your response. I appreciate
Thank you,
the
Eric.
candor on that. Just as a practical matter, coming from a different state and moving into the Commonwealth and its alphabet soup of DESE, SBA, and things along those lines, you referenced doing some research on it, and I'm not sure if you how when you were looking at an entry plan to a community like Melrose, the ramp up or the potential challenges of learning a new structure of government and just the differences between the two states in terms of where there are synergies, what you do now, and versus the potential challenges in coming into a different, leading a district in a different state.
I just want to make sure I understand your question, Eric. Are you asking what my approach would be to taking on the challenge of learning new laws, procedures, policies, and such between New Hampshire and the Commonwealth?
Everything that we have to govern how we deliver educational services in the Commonwealth.
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. I mean, it's an obvious question that should be asked, right? Just as we would in New Hampshire if a superintendent were coming from Massachusetts, how do you make that transition? So there are a couple of answers I have that may sound glib, but they're not meant to be. I have several colleagues who already work in Massachusetts as superintendents or retired superintendents who have already reached out to offer their tutelage, so to speak. So Bill Lupini, who lives in Beverly, who had been the superintendent in the public schools of Brookline. Anna Nolan, who is the new superintendent in Newton, who's leaving Natick as their superintendent. Greg Gilligan, who's the superintendent in North Andover, all of whom I have a strong professional relationship with, to kind of begin talking about how they entered into their roles and what some of the key transition differences are based on their understanding, not having worked in New Hampshire themselves, but understanding some of the differences. I have, as a luxury, the opportunity to have studied at Boston College, both from my master's program as well as my doctoral program. So not only did I study under professors who are career research professors, I also worked with professors and adjunct instructors who were either retired superintendents in the Commonwealth or were acting superintendents. Someone like Lincoln Lynch, who has a real strong grasp on finance in the Commonwealth and has, since his retirement out of Walpole, been serving as an interim finance administrator in several school districts to help them get back on track, to really dig in and give a third-party objective viewpoint on where the budgeting is. And he's provided a module with me already, having had his course back during my doctoral program, being able to provide even more guidance and counseling on some of the nuances between constructing a budget in New Hampshire and in the Commonwealth. Erwin Blummer, who had been an award-winning superintendent in Newton, in Brookline, who had a very strong DEI focus back when DEI wasn't even thought of, and being able to have him as a mentor, who also serves as a professional coach for me, being able to talk about some of the differences. And I go back to Bill Lupini. Bill got hired in New Hampshire for the Winnicott School District, SAU 21, which is Hampton, Seabrook, and a high school cooperative district, out of Massachusetts. And David DeRossi, who had been in Weston for 3 years, was hired in Raymond, New Hampshire, small town Raymond, for 1 year as an interim. And my connection with them both was them looking at me wide-eyed saying, this is the Wild West up here. And they helped kind of bridge the difference between Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which I then have reached out and said, let's keep that bridge open because I'm going to have some questions for you as well. MASS does a fairly competent, if not excellent job at providing orientation, retreat, and training time for new superintendents to the role. And they actually have a module that's built specifically for superintendents who are coming from out of state into the Commonwealth to understand some of the differences. I think what I'd be dealing with is a lot of some different nomenclature, right? So understanding some of the moving parts and the different names for them. So we call it Adequacy Grant Fund. You call it Foundation Grant or Chapter 70. We call it CAT aid or category aid. You call it circuit breaker. So when we get to some of the vocab differences but the same effect when it comes to budget, I don't think that's going to be a big leap. When it comes to the law, there's always that opportunity to be a student of the law, which I am. I teach education law for Southern New Hampshire University at both the graduate and the doctoral level. And I teach advanced public policy in law for the University of New Hampshire as an adjunct instructor. So it's not specific to state statute, although in the master's level program we do teach a lot around state statute. But I also had Diana Pullen, who is a professor of law and public policy at Boston College, who also taught in the law school. And we went through not just the 10 Bill of Rights that directly apply to public schools, but also several key laws that fall within the Commonwealth that outline not just special education, but certainly finance and governance. And lastly, working within a municipality, the budget timeline and the appropriation schedule in Nashua and Manchester are very similar, if not identical, to that here in Melrose. Working with the mayor, who's a member of the school committee, working with the council, or in Nashua, the board of mayor and aldermen, and working with on developing a budget, presenting it with the school committee, adopting and bringing it to with a recommendation to the council, and then getting your appropriation in June, by the way, which means hiring is difficult, Mr. Mayor. I'm very adept at working within those models as well. So do I have a learning curve? Yes, I do. I would have a learning curve as part of my entry plan coming into a new district if I was currently working in the Commonwealth. But I think the culture issues I think the issues that I've heard of today are trust and communication. Those are issues that we're dealing with in all school districts. So I think some of the more concrete, tangible functions and vocabulary in Massachusetts are things that I can simply learn in practice. You're welcome. My gosh, we're scaring people out of the room. Thank you for coming.
Hi again.
Did you text your mom?
I didn't. No. We've expanded our board this year to include student liaisons and a MECO liaison. And the other night I was able to bring along our student liaison, but he cannot make it.
Bummer.
So I'm going to read his question for you.
Thank you.
Students sometimes have difficulty building trust with teachers. What would you do to help help school leaders improve communication with students to address student concerns?
So that just gives me a whole host of things that we could talk about, but I don't think we have that kind of time. I'll throw this out that I'm very disappointed I didn't have an opportunity to have a student or a group of students to talk with, since that's the center of everything that we do. And I've not yet spoken with a student formally. Today I took ample opportunity on my tour of the high school to interrupt students whatever it was they were doing. They wanted to know who's the guy in the suit walking through the school. So thank you for that question from that student. The student-teacher relationship is the most important relationship in a school system. Without it, there can't be trust, there can't be understanding, there can't be a place for a student to feel that he or she can go and be safe and give information, get guidance, get advice. So either through an advisory program, a social emotional learning curriculum, there are a lot of structured ways for that to happen. What I would prefer that we do is empower our school leaders to work with student cabinets, to work with representatives, to work in setting up safe spaces where students are able to share exactly what it is that they're going through. So we do that through our affinity spaces. We do that through the superintendent's cabinet, where we have representatives from the elementary, middle, and high school sit with the superintendent, me, or the associate or assistant superintendent, and kind of discuss, hey, here's what's going on in school. So we can share that with school principals if they don't feel comfortable going to the school principal because of, I don't know, retribution or afraid of what the principal is going to say or do. So while continuing to try to build that relationship at the school level, because that's where it has to happen. I think that when I hear a question like that, it makes me wonder about how we're approaching this opportunity for all students to really feel like they can come in and talk with anybody and feel safe doing it. So that causes me to think a little bit about how we can make that happen and how much time that's going to take. But I can say that the feeling that I got and what I've heard people share is that student culture and student climate appears to be pretty strong and appears to be pretty positive. Now, if you peel back layers, I suspect that we're going to find some things that obviously need to be addressed. But I mean, that would be the easiest way for me to go about that. But again, there are so many steps to trying to answer that question. I'd love to hear from the student. I'd really love to hear from that student so we could talk a little bit more and I could ask a couple questions. He can email me, or he can go on Facebook, right?
I don't recommend it.
Hi.
Hi.
It's me again, Jana.
Great.
I also took a class from Diana Pullen. You're right, she's great.
Yeah. She's hard.
Yeah.
Oh,
My
yeah.
question actually builds off the student's question, but rather in terms of communication with parents. As superintendent, you must get like a deluge of emails from parents, and I'm curious how you handle that, how you handle responding to, do you respond to every single parent email you get? How do you handle that? And then also, how do you solicit parental input, particularly from communities who may not may be hesitant, such as parents who are not native English speakers, and other parents who may not feel as empowered.
Or who may not have had a positive experience in school when they were children and therefore don't want to come in and rock the boat. Sure, yeah. So emails. Email's a form of communication, and I don't want to show you the number I have, but a lot of work was done to help parents really go to the source of the answer that was going to most impact whatever it was that they were looking for. And that didn't start with me. Because what happens is if a parent emails something to me, either requesting an answer or permission or to register a complaint about something that happens in school, first I have to work through it, and then I have to understand it. So I'm going to go to the school and I'm going to try and figure out what it is that's happening at the school. So what we've done with all of our leadership teams in our schools is, and with our parents, I didn't know if you had to get that. Is it okay? Is have them begin at the space where it first occurred. So let's say it's a complaint about something that was taught in the classroom. We've asked parents, please contact the teachers directly. And then it's about holding teachers accountable to responding to that parent within a certain amount of time. If they're not happy with that response or they don't hear, they know they can go to the principal, and the principal knows that he's going to have to or she's going to have to respond to that parent. So if I'm receiving, and this is as of late, particularly this year, if I'm receiving an email from a parent, usually it's somebody venting about not being happy with the process they just went through to try to get their answer. If it's about getting the answer, they're calling. They're not emailing, because we want to talk to that parent. And so we'll vary between having a parent come in and sit down and meet. So the day before our February vacation, there was a parent who really needed to have a conversation with me before, as all school districts do, goes into the black hole when vacation happens, right? Because you feel like you'll never get the thing done when you come back. So we met at 7:30 on that Friday morning. I invited her in, we sat down, we went through it. There were tears, there were tissues, and we worked through it. And that could never have happened if she had just emailed that to me, and we were able to resolve the problem right there. During COVID, it was a very different story. I communicated with families just about every day. I went to work every day while everybody was at home because everything going on inside of our 7 school districts, I needed to be centralized and focused. So I was there. And from there, we communicated each day on different topics that were arising, different issues that we saw coming up, different suggestions, just keeping the open lines of communication, because during periods of trauma or crisis, if you're not hearing from somebody that you need to be hearing from, you panic even more. And what that does is transcends to the kids who are in the house, which makes it even worse for kids. So we tried to allay fears as best we could by just staying in constant communication. And then on weekends, it was the same thing. People would respond to those emails. We would send out periodically, I'd send a video message. And my favorite was when somebody responded and said, maybe you should stick to the emails, because they didn't want to see this. But the feedback we received was, thank you so much for sending this out. I have another question. If somebody had a question, we would wait 24 hours, because if other questions came in that were similar, we would then send that next piece of communication that addressed that question, so that we're not individually responding to 23 people with the same answer. We're letting everybody know, because there might be 100 people out there who don't want to ask that question because they didn't have a good experience with the superintendent prior. From an EL perspective, when I was in Manchester, we had everything translated for us. So we have, in Manchester, there are 84 different dialects, over 50 languages that are spoken. Some are so discrete that it wasn't necessarily a translation service that we were able to provide. We would simply work through the International Center and find our translators who could then be on the phone with parents that we needed to get in touch with that very important information in a dialect that not many people in the city spoke. but certainly in the more predominant languages that are spoken, Spanish, Portuguese, Brazil. I can't think of a couple others. We had some of our Sudanese students and families who had moved in as well. So making sure that our documents were already translated for them, because at the time we didn't have, the reliability on Google Translate like I know your website does, and even that isn't even 100% reliable still. So we were very mindful of making sure messages that were getting back to parents who spoke a language other than English was done so in a language that they could understand. Sure.
We'll take one more.
Hi, my name is Mike Patello. I have a child in elementary school here, and I had a number of questions, but everyone had asked them before I could, so struggling to come up with something else. But building off of her question about communication, what, in your experience, has been your involvement with PTOs, using them to facilitate relationships between the school, the student body, and parents, and what would you like to bring to Melrose and with using PTOs or other organizations that are there to support the school and the children?
It's a great question. So I thought, Mike, you were going to ask me of how do we communicate with families who don't have children currently enrolled in our schools. I just gave you a second question. I'm going to answer yours first, though. My experience working in Manchester with the number of schools that we had and the number of PTOs, there were 22 schools in Manchester, 4 high schools, 3 middle schools, and the balance 16, including a preschool, elementaries. All of our elementary schools had a PTO. And so they had an expectation that they had some form of connection with the superintendent's office. And periodically, the superintendent every month would attend. She asked me to attend quarterly. We would ask a representative from each of those PTOs to bring issues from their local PTO to a district-wide PTO meeting at the district office. And so you could imagine the number of issues depending upon the school that these PTO representatives were coming from. The range would be everything from language to supporting this fundraiser, having concerns about the grounds and how they could help. So everything in between that PTOs want to be helpful with. So we would hear those and we would try to respond to those, and we would try to do that because that was the most efficient way for us to be able to do that given the size of the district. Here it's 6 elementary schools. And so I would envision something very similar where we would have the opportunity to be together with representatives of the 6 chairs perhaps, where we're going to be able to talk through communication issues to make sure we're reaching out to all of our families and asking our PTO leaders to be stewards of whatever that communication is, to kind of talk through what kind of support the superintendent's office can provide, because I'm hopeful, and please tell me if I'm wrong, principals attend the PTO meetings. Outstanding. So being able to have that connection between building leadership, district leadership, and our PTOs, which are 501c3 or nonprofit organizations, having that triad really creates and builds agency among the parent community, where if you're feeling empowered from the superintendent's office and from the principal being a part of those meetings and that work, that more is going to be accomplished and more is going to be supported. And if that's the goal, then that's something that I'm all in for. I also like to hear a parent perspective when it isn't necessarily about their child. So to get input from community members, whether they're parents or not, in my community, 80% of the people who live in our towns do not have children in our school districts. 80%. So we have people moving into New Hampshire who, and this is the second question that you thought to ask, but I phrased for you. We have people who move into New Hampshire who don't have children because it's a wonderful place to retire where your only tax is your property tax. And in a 55 and over community, it's a reduced tax. And if it's a rental property or a condo, you're paying far less than what you would pay to buy a single family home. So we have an increasing number of questions of, What are my tax dollars getting me? Because I don't have kids there and I don't have grandkids there. So what are my tax dollars getting me? So we've invited through direct mail, trying to connect them electronically to all of the information that we put out. Our local schools invite people into their buildings as community centers. We've sent fifth graders out to some of our retirement communities to work with, particularly right after COVID, when we were still utilizing Zoom communication for a lot of our meetings, to help people who are 55 and over utilize Zoom and be able to dial in and talk with students. We have student ambassadors at our schools who reach out to people who live in town who don't have children in our schools. We have storefront owners and restaurant owners who don't have kids, but we sure do buy a lot of food and stuff from them for our kids, and we inform that way. So by being connected as a community to the schools and involving them in some of the things that we do, again, 7 school district budgets, 7 budgets pass. So I think that we have a lot of work to do, but bringing that into Melrose, I mean, just having gone down Main Street a couple of times today and knowing, with the economic development director, hearing some of the connections that already exist, being able to ensure that everybody is involved and feel like they belong in the school community. Think of how strong we could be if that were the case. So that's what I'd be after, and I think the PTOs play an important role in that. Sure.
With that, I'm going to invite your closing comments, please, Superintendent Rayan.
Thank you. I do appreciate, Al, I know we've been a little, laughing through it, but I do appreciate that you did that, and I do appreciate that you asked that. There were also some folks who, I think on your local news media patch, that decided to apply some comments in the reply section that had been pointed out to me as well, that I was hoping that they were in attendance as well, because I want to answer those kinds of questions. It's silly for me to sit here and think that you're not going to try and do some research on whomever the next person is that's going to be coming in and working with your children. It's the most important thing that you can do as a parent. So I'm very grateful that you asked that question to give me an opportunity to respond. It's been a great day. This is a work day for me, and it started very early on downtown, and we're not done. And I'm really looking forward to it. I had a day just like this on Tuesday. We have a couple of these a week. This is what a superintendent does. I like to think that my sense of humor allows me to be disarming. I hope it was not offensive, because I take my job very seriously. I take the direction and the future of your children and the children of this town very seriously when I'm in the role, because I certainly want our next leaders, who are going to be taking care of all of us, to be confident, engaged, happy, healthy, and successful people. I think as a community, coming together to be able to do that, you are ripe as a community to be able to do that. Melrose, I think, is right there. There's nothing perfect about anything that I do. There's certainly nothing perfect about anything like a town of Melrose or any other town that's around you. We're all in this together. I would just like very much to come and help, work with the school committee, work with you, our school leadership that's in place, and provide some level of expertise that I've gathered over my last 26 years in public education, learn and grow with you, and perhaps move us forward into that next phase, which is everyone in the Commonwealth saying, well, what's Melrose doing? We want to do that. So thank you so much for giving up your time to be here tonight. I really appreciate it, and I certainly hope I get to see you again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate your being here. We certainly want to extend our deep appreciation to the community who's here tonight, and your interest in advocacy in our schools, our city, and as you have probably seen all day long, our citizens really care about each other. They care about our students, and we're grateful for that. And we will see you at the school committee interview, which will be recorded and televised, beginning at 7:30 in the City Council chamber of Melrose City Hall. And don't forget to fill out your surveys. Thank you so much.